Notre Dame fans, welcome back to another edition of the Irish Breakdown Podcast. It is Friday, Vince, so that means it's mailbag time, and that means it's a Friday free-for-all, which means our listeners and subscribers and Notre Dame fans can ask whatever Notre Dame football, whatever Notre Dame recruiting, or college football in general questions that they want. So that's what we're going to be discussing today. There's a lot going on. The transfer rule got passed yesterday, which I think is a terribly stupid rule, which is kind of par for the course for the NCAA. It's official. Visits are back.
Yeah.
Starting June 1st, visits are back. So we're actually going to be having – this is a crazy notion. Prospective college football players are actually going to be able to visit the schools that they want to spend the next 4 years of their lives, kind of formative years of their lives. So, and, of course, we're jam-packed through spring ball. Notre Dame is now 9 practices in through the spring. And just a lot going on, Vince. So let's dive right in. There may be a time, I apologize in advance. There may be a time I have to kind of dip out for about 2 minutes. My wife is going to be out of town this weekend, so I may need to say goodbye to her depending on what time she gets by. And today is my dad's birthday, and he always listens, so I want to wish him a happy 66th birthday. So my dad is a loyal listener, so half of our downloads every month for the podcast are probably my dad. But let's get things rolling, man. Let's dive right in. We're going to have a lot going on. We already had about 10, 12 comments at least before we even started at 1. So, man, we are so fired up that you guys are fired up about this. It makes it so much more fun to do, knowing that you guys and gals are all with us and ready to rock and roll. So, Vince, Michael Collins is leading us off again this week.
And he's bringing the heat, Brian, and it might hurt our friendship, but that's okay. So, Brian, it's you, Eric, and Vince in a college football video game tournament. Who wins and which year's Notre Dame team do you pick to play with? Sorry, couldn't resist since you already took down BK. Yeah, he's referring to last week when we were talking about
if I can't beat a 60-year-old in an NCAA game, then what am I doing here? I'm just saying. I mean, I gotta take down Coach Kelly in the NCAA game. I would absolutely smash Vince. With all due respect, I love you, Vince, but you'd get smashed. And Eric, was Eric even old enough to play NCAA before he got taken down?
That's a really solid question.
I'd have to ask him.
I spent a good chunk of my formative years playing NCAA, and there was a game called College Football's National Championship that I played religiously when I was a kid, and those are the only games I played. Were like football, baseball, the actual sporting type games.
Right.
I think it would be a pretty good battle between you and me.
It would be really close until kickoff. And then after kickoff, I would run away with it.
The trash talking.
No, I mean, warm-ups and everything would be really close, really competitive, similar uniforms, but then afterwards.
So what team are you going to use?
I'd probably go with the 05 Notre Dame team.
That's what I was going to say.
But honestly, the teams I was really money with was some of those 08, 09 teams with Jimmy Clausen and because the offense was so nasty, I could just score on you. And yes, the defense was garbage, but I mean, I could
run up the score. It's video games.
Well, I could pick you apart with Jimmy Clausen. But the team that I really liked playing with, and I probably should admit this, is I was really, really good with that Texas team back when they had Vince Young.
Yeah.
I could have some fun with that one.
There you go.
But honestly, the way that I normally played is I'd pick a Notre Dame team and just kind of build it. I liked playing. I actually did more recruiting stuff than I actually did playing. The most of the playing I did when I was coaching, we'd have tournaments with my players and stuff like that. But when I was just playing at home, normally I didn't even really play that many games. I would just play like the title game. But then I would simulate the whole year so I could recruit, and that's what I always like to do.
Recruiting,
but I like to build teams too. Or I would take a team like just some garbage team like SMU, and then do like the legacy thing where you could then get hired and promoted to other jobs. That's the kind of stuff I like to do. But
me too. That's
if I was to go with Notre Dame, I would go with probably the 05 team would be one of my favorites if I could go with it. But
so what you're saying is we need to have a game between you and me. And we can put it up there and everybody can watch me kick your butt.
I mean, if you want to be embarrassed that way, we could try something like that.
That's something we need to think about.
Hey, what's funny actually is speaking of this, the NFL or last time I played video games, I haven't played it in a while, but they had like this game called NFL GM, and you can you're just a GM.
Yeah.
You can play it, but like you're a GM. That was probably I got sick one time and my wife went and bought that for me because it's been about 7-8 years ago now. And I got sick, and I was like, I just wasn't going anywhere. And so my wife bought me this game to play. And that was pretty fun too, because I always dug kind of the simulation, the legacy, you could play like
I'm with you.
Do all the recruiting and build yourself, and you get offered jobs, you can turn jobs down and all that kind of stuff. That was the fun part for me, which shouldn't be a shocker for anyone that knows me. My dad likes to joke that I never dreamed of growing up to wanting to be a professional player. I always dreamed I wanted to be a coach. That was always what I wanted to do. So anyway, good question, Michael. And
that's fun.
Yeah, that's a good way to start.
All right, so let's jump into this thing. Jared Voigt, I'm going to say is how you say his last name. Whatever happened to Jaden Gould? Seemed as though a month ago he was being talked about as a guy who could potentially commit in the spring. Now it appears as though he's not even being recruited.
Well, I think with Jaden, there's a couple things there. Number one is there's some other factors that are kind of in this recruitment that don't have to do with him as a football player or necessarily a character thing either. I don't want it to come across that way, but there's some red flags that could make it say, is that really the direction that we want to go? I think that's part of it. I think the other part of it is they're really looking for cover players in this class, not necessarily the big corners. They have a lot of the bigger corners, Ryan Barnes and Philip Riley last year. They were looking for guys that are more just cover players, a little bit more versatility from a coverage standpoint, so outside boundary slot, whereas Gould is a boundary potential safety kind of guy. So I think those two factors went into it, and I just think there's some other guys that they like better. Obviously, Kamari Rogers, where things aren't looking great with Kamari Rogers right now. Jaden Mickey was a guy that they really liked. Now, Ben Morrison's a guy they're pushing for, Jair Brown. So I think there's just some other players they liked better because of, not necessarily that they don't like Jaden as a player, because they do, but when you take some of those other factors that kind of said, hey, maybe we should do a little bit more digging first, combine that with the fact that he just isn't as good as he is. And I like Jaden Gould a lot, but I understand where they're coming from because they're just looking for a different type of player. They have guys like Jaden Gould. They don't have, as many guys like, Kamari Rogers or even Jaden Mickey or Ben Morrison.
All right, Dylan has a question basically about the defensive line. He pretty much this is almost like a podcast long answer probably. But the current roster of Notre Dame defensive linemen, et cetera, et cetera. He wants to know kind of who's lining up at what spot and what would a 3-man front look like compared to a 4-man front from a personnel standpoint. Summarized there.
So let's can you keep that up, Vince, so we can kind of go through those names? So Foskey is a Viper. Are you talking about? I would imagine that's Nana Osafa-Mensah.
Yeah.
Ansa, just kind of bringing those two together makes sense. Just kind of contract them a little bit. He's a big end. Justin Adamiola is a big end. Jason Adamiola is a 3 technique defensive tackle. You can call it any way you want it. Riley Mills is a 3 technique. Jordan Botelho is a Viper, and then Myron Tungavaloa Amosa is also a big end. So that's how those guys would fit together. Kurt Heinisch is a nose tackle. Howard Cross is a nose tackle. Aiden Keanaaina is a nose tackle. Gabriel Rubio is a 3 technique. These are some of the guys we haven't mentioned yet. Now, as far as what it would look like in a 3-man versus 4-man, the 4-man is going to be what it was. You're going to have the Viper on the weak side, probably on the same side as the 3 technique, but they do from breaking down Cincinnati's film, this may not be true at Notre Dame. He may adjust, but they did a lot more mix between over and under fronts. What that means is in Notre Dame's defense, they were almost exclusively an under front under Clark Lee, meaning the 3 technique was on the same side as the Viper more often than not. And then they would have the nose sort of the field and then the big end, and then you'd have like the Rover, the Mike, and the Buck behind it. I saw them doing a lot more under front or over fronts, which means the 3 technique is to the field, the nose is to the boundary, which means the nose and the Viper would be on the same side. So we'll see how that looks from there. But for the most part, the overall structure of the front 4 is going to look the same. The Viper is going to be a boundary player. The big end is going to be to the field more often than not. And that's why we use big end more. They call it a big end, but also I used to call it a strong side end, but Notre Dame doesn't really do strong side, weak side anymore. Vince, we've talked about this. It's more of a, because it could, the big end could be to the weak side, because it's going to be based on field boundary, not necessarily formation strength.
Right.
The strong side end came from it was a formation strength thing. So if you put the strength of your formation into the boundary back in the day, you then would put your big end or your strong side end the boundary because it was going to go to the strong side. The theory back then was when tight ends were more prominent and tight ends were more, the bigger blockers, you wanted to have that bigger end lined up to where the tight end was. A lot of times is kind of the theory behind it.
Right.
Now, when the 3 down, so here's why we say it's going to vary. So let's go with it in a traditional 3-3-5 alignment. Okay, so this is what they did a lot of at Cincinnati, just a traditional 3-3-5. And what we mean by that traditional 3-3-5 is 3-3-5 personnel, meaning 3 down linemen, 3 linebackers, 5 DBs.
Right.
So what that's going to look like is you're essentially going to have 2-5 techniques, although they'll move around. They'll line up in 4 eyes. 5 technique is basically it's the outside ends. Shoulder of the tackle.
Yeah, right.
Okay. A 4 eye is you're lining up on the inside shoulder of the tackle. And then in that case, you'd have some guys walked up off the edge. It's kind of a reduced look to get extra guys off of the edge. But in just a typical look, if we're just going to say like a base 3 down look, you'd have a nose tackle, which would be that Kurt Heinisch, Howard Cross, Aiden Keanaaina player. Then you'd have your the way that Cincinnati did it, they'd have the big end would actually be into the boundary in those situations, because then he could reduce inside and play the 3 technique, and they'd walk a backer up off of the edge. And then their Viper, which is Mekhi Sanders, I forget how to pronounce his name, but number 21, their real good pass rusher, he would actually then be a field guy in a lot of times in their 3 down looks. So that is sort of their traditional. And then they'd have 3 linebackers, 2 safeties, could be a corner or a safety as that 3rd guy, and then the 2 outside corners. That's the alignment. What I think we could see a lot at Notre Dame, and what we've seen in the practices, is a 3-3 look out of 3-4 personnel. What that means is, out of 4-2-5 personnel. What that means is, instead of bringing in a 3rd linebacker, what we're seeing on film is they simply take the Viper, whether it's Foskey or Botelho, and he is off the ball as that 3rd linebacker.
Right.
Now, we've also seen a little bit of them doing a 3-3 personnel. So there's 4-2 personnel, then 3-3 personnel, and then you could even do 3-4 personnel in certain looks. But that 4-2 personnel, or actually, it's we want to be technical, it's really 4-3 personnel. If you want to count Jack Kaiser as a linebacker, because he's playing the rover, correct? Right. And so in those looks, you're seeing, because we're seeing it with Isaiah Foskey, we're seeing it with Botelho, we're seeing it with Devin Upau, where they're actually taking that Viper and they're taking him off the ball. Now, what I like about that, Vince, is they're not using him as a traditional linebacker. He's not lining up in a stack and he's reading and flowing, but they're using that guy to attack. And what that does is means you're not just going to always know where Isaiah Foskey's coming from. He can obviously line up on the edge, but then the very next series, he can line up in a stack formation and blitz on the inside or do all types of different things. And I think that gives some versatility to what they do. So, Dylan, that is – yeah, you're right, Vince. We could do a whole show on that. But that is a basic – I mean, again, this is 3-3-5 101. There's a lot more to it, but from a base where, kind of how things would start at the very beginning, that's what it would look like.
And then he's kind of got a little bit of a follow-up. I'll throw it up here. Could you see Fosco and Patello sharing snaps in a similar way to Hayes and Foskey did last year?
Yeah, they're both going to play. And the other thing is I think we're going to see some of them on the field together from a little bit of what we've seen, but also some things that I've heard. When you get into some nickel packages, you're going to see both of those guys on the field together. And this is where Jordan Botelho can recruiting him can be a really big advantage, because what you have at Notre Dame was – he was a Mike linebacker a lot of times in high school. I mean, he's a guy that I felt could play Mike linebacker in certain defenses. I really like what he brings to the table athletically and just really can project to multiple spots. And so that gives you a lot more flexibility with Jordan Botelho and how you're going to use him, where you're going to line him up. And it gives you opportunities against pass-heavy teams. So I don't be shocked if we see Botelho and Isaiah Foskey on the field together when they play USC, for example. So we're going to see them play together more than we saw Dalen Hayes and Isaiah Foskey play together. Although we did see that at times last year. But you're gonna see a lot more of that against certain teams. And when they're playing more of a base defense, Vince, we'll see more of them in a rotation. And I do believe you're going to see a good amount of Botelho this year, just because Marcus Freeman likes to rotate, Mike Elston likes to rotate. That's a good combination. But I also think there's a lot of teams on the schedule this year that are going to be pushing the tempo. And because of that, you're going to see them try to do more
right,
series to series rotations as opposed to in series rotations.
Makes sense.
Just so I can explain what that means. When you play tempo teams, a lot of times, Vince, you know this as an offensive guy. If they're really pushing the tempo, it's harder for you to rotate during.
That's the whole point. Well, not the whole point. That's one of the points of going fast is that the defense doesn't have the chance to sub.
Now, good defensive teams will say if the guy is tackled on our sideline,
we're subbing.
Immediate sub.
And they've done that in the past.
Right.
Notre Dame has done that in the past.
Correct. Now that's an in series exchange, in series substitution.
Right.
What a lot of teams will do against tempo teams is they will do substitutions from series to series to make sure that they don't get caught with Kurt Hinish playing 20 straight plays because they didn't sub from between series. And then if you can get those your starters back on or your second team back on during the series, then you have a plan for that. But that is what we'll see a lot of that this year.
So Sean has kind of an open-ended question, so you can take this whichever direction you want to go, Brian. But he says, what are some things you're hearing from sources that haven't been discussed at length or are apparent in the videos that we've seen? And he's obviously referring to the 3-minute snippets that we get from every practice.
Right. Well, I think can you leave those up, Vince? So I can kind of have those as we go. Sean, first of all, I think a lot of the stuff that we've heard, I've talked about, and that's kind of what I try to do with y'all is when I hear stuff, we bring it, we talk about it.
Yeah.
Some of the things that I'm hearing that maybe aren't being talked about a lot is there is legitimate competition at the Mike linebacker position because Drew White has been banged up. That's part of it. But even if Drew White was healthy, there was going to be competition there, and that's going to happen when you bring in a first-year coach.
Good.
Everything is going to be started. But Bo Bauer, from what I'm told, has played very well. He is really thriving. Some of the things I'm hearing behind the scenes is Shane Simon is not just flashing in the highlights, but Shane Simon is having a very good spring, just in general. And right now, he has, from what I'm told by at least one source, is that he has been the most impressive Buck linebacker or will linebacker that Notre Dame has. So do not be surprised if Shane Simon is sticking around and doing maybe a little better than he did last year, which is a big part of it. So that's going to be a big part of what we see. Some other things, Riley Mills is an interesting guy. He is a guy that got off to a little bit of a slow start to the spring, but what I'm told has really come on in the last week or two and is really making plays. And they had hoped that the 3 technique they had hoped that Jason Adamiola and Riley Mills would play well enough this spring to make them feel comfortable leaving Myron Tungvaloa on the field as a big end. And so far they haven't only met the standard, they've surpassed it. Jason Adamiola has been, from what I'm told by a couple sources, has been Notre Dame's best defensive lineman so far through spring. And Riley Mills is coming along. Justin Adamiola is playing. He's always had a chip on his shoulder. It's even bigger now. He's having a really good spring to the point where the staff is working to say, okay, we've got all these guys that can ball. Howard Cross is having a great spring, which Brian Kelly talked about. Mike Elson talked about. So we're going to see a very, very deep rotation there. Offensively, I think I've mentioned this before, but I keep hearing that they're going to play a lot of receivers this year. It's not just going to be your starters. And part of that is because they don't have those big guys that they can just throw out there every snap. But part of it is because there's a lot of different guys making plays. A lot of encouragement from what Braden Lindsey's doing. Lawrence Keys is killing people this spring, from what I'm told. Xavier Watts is playing really well. A lot of guys are really stepping up. And so there's some encouragement there. And I'm also told that I was surprised by this, but don't be surprised if both Rocco Spindler and Blake Fisher are getting legitimate playing time this year. Is that it's partly because they're just not thrilled with what they've seen so far, but also because those two guys are having really good springs. It's part of the reason I want to see them start to lock guys into positions soon.
Right.
Those are some things I'm hearing. And look, Jack Cohn is everything Notre Dame thought he would be and better, but there is a legitimate battle at quarterback going on. Drew Pine is impressing people and is earning that battle. At first, it was just kind of like Drew deserves it. He's the returner, and Jack's got to earn it. But it's turned into where Drew's battling for it. I think Jack Cohn, from what I'm hearing right now, is got the edge.
Sure,
but it is a legitimately tight battle, and Drew Pine is not going away anytime soon.
Okay, so Thomas is going to throw us some love here. I'm sure everyone appreciates your guys' humility with the success of the site and everything that you're doing. Just make sure you give yourselves a pat on the back because we all appreciate the work that you put in to bring us all this great content. So thank you. And we appreciate it. Obviously, we want to thank all of you. And it's not just a humility thing. It's a fact that we can't do this if it's not for everybody else. So and we enjoy doing it. I mean, we enjoy doing this. It's a job, yes, but we enjoy it. So
I also threw my shoulder out the other day, so I can't reach around and pat myself in the back. So.
I'm getting too old as
yeah.
All right.
That's how I might have thrown my shoulder out, if for being honest.
Patting yourself on the back.
Perhaps.
This is a really good question. I like this one. BK said that Jack Cohn has a better arm than he initially thought. Do you think Cohn has the ability to lead the Irish to a title? I think it's, for me personally, I think it's less about what Jack Cohn brings to the table and more about what the offense is going to bring to the table as to whether Notre Dame can win a title or not. Does he have the physical skills to lead Notre Dame? Absolutely. I mean, if they're doing RPOs and he clearly has the arm strength to stretch the field, I think he has the moxie to fit it into some small windows. I think he has the talent to do it. I think the defense is around to do it. Is the offensive philosophy, is the offensive game plan going to be such that Notre Dame can score enough to be a title contender? I think that's the bigger question.
Let me ask you this, Vince. Let me ask you this.
Ahead.
Okay, so just to follow up, because this is something he had asked in another podcast, and I want him to ask it, and I have an opinion on this too, but I kind of want to get you to expand on this. So here's my question. So let's say Notre Dame goes out as a staff and they make the changes that we talk about. They push the tempo a little bit. They're mixing things up. They're using all their personnel. They're attacking down the field. And we're seeing that in film. We're seeing that in the videos. I mean, they're throwing the ball deep a lot. We're seeing RPOs. We're seeing bubble screens. We're seeing look screens. We're seeing quick game. So they make the necessary changes, right? They really open things up. They're using two backs. They're using, they're mixing up the personnel. Michael Mayer's going to be a monster. All those types of things are happening. They're going to play Clemson. They're going to play Alabama. They're going to play, Georgia. They're going to play Ohio State. They're going to play whoever. They're going to play those top teams that are title contenders or teams that have won titles. The reality is the philosophy can only take you so far, right? Mm-hmm. And you need a playmaker quarterback. And so my question is yes, the philosophy has been the thing that's held Notre Dame back. However, I still don't think Notre Dame wins a title the last 3 years even if the philosophy is correct, because I don't think that we saw a quarterback that was able to make those plays in those big games. So my question is this, because I do think Notre Dame did some things schematically in 2018 to put up more points against Clemson. If you get into those games and Tommy Rees is doing what you and I think and hope that Tommy Rees is capable of doing and all those kind of things, Jeff Quinn is, answering the bell and the offensive line's playing well. In those big games, do you believe Jack Cohn? Because everybody knows my answer because I've been higher on Jack Cohn. You're the one that's been a little bit skeptical. So I think it's even a better answer for you or question for you. Do you think he has the physical tools within the framework of a better system to go out and make some of those plays that are going to allow you to win a championship and do the things you need to do? Because I think we both agree Notre Dame's not going to score 49 points a game like LSU did in 2019, but we also both agree that they don't need to because the defense is better than the LSU team, right?
Yes, no question. So here's how I would preface this with, I wish I could watch a full practice so I could watch Jack Cohn. I have watched his film, obviously, not to the extent that you have, but I have watched his film. Does he have the arm strength to make the throws necessary? Yes, I do believe that. Mr. Pencil, what was that?
Sorry, I had to scratch something off my screen.
I was like, are you pointing at me?
I just had my pencil in my hand. There was this little, how
I do.
How easily distracted I get, Vince. There's this little spot on my screen
I do know. Yes.
that I'm trying to get it off of. So,
okay. No, I would love to see him in person. And obviously that's not going to happen. So I have to go off of what we've seen on the film, the 3-minute film, and what we've been able to see from his game film when he was healthy. And that was, 2 years ago. I believe he's got the physical tools. Yes. Mm-hmm. From the game film that I've seen, I think that he has the mentality to throw the ball downfield, to fit the ball into some small windows, things of that nature. Mm-hmm. He doesn't have to be this amazing quarterback. He has to get the ball into the playmaker's hands. And the playmakers are behind him at the running back position, and they're all around him at the wide receiver and tight end position. Mm-hmm. And I believe that he can get the ball into their hands. Again, I reserve judgment a little bit because I want to see him in person, and I want to see him in a Notre Dame uniform doing some of these things. Mm-hmm. But from what I've been able to gather so far, does he have the ability? Yes, he absolutely has the ability. And the schedule lays out nicely for them to be in that situation at the end of the season. So,
and we've seen that, but it's more about, and I know you answered this, but it's more about, okay, once you get there, we know Notre Dame can get to the dance, but what can you do when you get there? And
absolutely.
For me, I think to Notre Dame 2164's question, I think BK's comments about him throwing the ball, having a better arm, a stronger arm was important because this is the argument that I've made watching his film. He looked limited because it was a limiting offense. It is an offense. It's an old school offense, and it works for Wisconsin. It makes a lot of sense for Wisconsin to do.
And it makes sense in the Big Ten.
Yes, because they can recruit big linemen. That state is littered with offensive linemen. They can get backs, and they're never going to have the kind of skill and speed that Notre Dame can bring to the table. So they can't run the kind of tempo offenses. It would be a terrible fit. It's like putting Rich Rod at Michigan. It'd be a bad fit to kind of go to that kind of. It works for them. But it also limits a quarterback unless you're an all-world quarterback like they had with Russell Wilson, who was and now a Super Bowl winning franchise quarterback.
Pretty good.
Jack Cohn's not that, and no one's accusing him of it. But to me, neither's Mac Jones. And to me, when I look at a guy like Jack Cohn, he's a lot more Mac Jones than he is Trevor Lawrence.
But people are talking about Mac Jones being the number 3 pick in the NFL draft right now.
But I mean, I think that's going to be – well, Mitch Trubisky was number 2, so that's being picked high doesn't necessarily mean you're a great quarterback. I think Jack Cohn, to me, is that style of – I'm talking about the style of play that where give him talent around him. He's got the grittiness to make those throws and make those plays. To me, I'm not concerned about Jack Cohn, honestly, being the reason that they don't win. I'm more concerned with, as Vince alluded to, making the necessary changes and not just doing them in the spring, but then really taking it to the next level in the fall.
Yeah.
And then the first time you don't score 40, you don't say, well, we tried, it didn't work, and then go away from it, which I don't think they would invest this much time in it if they weren't going to make it a part of what they do. I'm more concerned about the offensive line than I am the quarterback position. But that's fair. I think that we have to understand the circumstances are a little different for Notre Dame in that I do truly believe they have a defense, as we've seen in the postseason. We saw it against Clemson in 2018. We saw it against Alabama this year. They held Alabama to a season low in points. And yes, Alabama could have probably got another touchdown, but still, that meant it would have been, tied for their season low in scoring, which came in the first game of the year.
Right.
I think Clemson's another one where Notre Dame held Clemson to over 2 touchdowns below their season average in 2018. There's a lot of teams that if you could have held Clemson to 30, they're going to win that game because of their offense. And that, to me, is the key. I'm more concerned about the offensive line. And, again, Notre Dame doesn't need to score 49 points a game to win a title. They got to be able to score, 27 to 34 in those big games to have a chance because of their defense, or at least put them in a chance where at the end of the game they're going to get the ball with an opportunity to go win. And I believe that Jack Cohn has – I mean, some of the throws he made, go back and watch the Ohio State Big Ten title game that he played in. His numbers won't blow you away, again, in that offense, but they jumped out to a big lead on Ohio State, partly because of some really gritty throws that he made in that game. So he's been in those big spotlight moments, and he's battled, and I like that. And now you put him in a system that's going to allow him to be more aggressive in attack. I think he can do it, and I believe the same thing of Drew Pine. I do. And we've been on the Drew Pine thing for a little while now. We've talked about that before the season. Some people are, I can't believe you think Drew Pine's got a shot to be okay, well, here we are.
Proof's in the pudding, man.
Here we are.
Yeah, I agree. Okie dokie. Let's see here. Here's a good one. How much of a role do you think Sibo Flemister will have in the Notre Dame offense this year? He always seems like a punishing runner, perhaps short yardage plays. Now, here's my thing about Sibo, and he's the number 3 back, and I don't think anybody is going to argue with the fact that he's the number 3 back. And I think he could fit in that role as like the short yardage guy if they wanted to have a package for Sibo. Here's the problem with that, in my eyes, is that both Williams and Tyree can run you over too. Like they are not afraid. They are not afraid of contact, and I'm not. I wouldn't be upset having either one of those guys in on short yardage either. Now, if you want to be an effective running team, you got to have a third back, and that's kind of who Sebo is. So if they want to have a package for him, that's fine. If they want to give him a series here and there, that's fine. My issue is when the game is on the line and you give Sebo Flemister that series that I don't think he should have when you've got Tyree and Williams sit on the sideline. Like I don't think that's the role I really want.
Can I ask you a couple questions, Vince, on this question?
Yeah.
So first of all, real quick comment on the pounding thing. I agree with you. I think Kyron's a very good short yardage back. We saw that against Pitt more than anything, where there's a lot of third and shorts and second and shorts where he had to just put his shoulder down and get that yardage. He has the combination of vision, low build, and willingness to run over. My question is if you get into those short yardage situations, yes, they can do it, but isn't there some merit to possibly not asking them to do it? Just less of a big pounding.
So
you get in those goal line situations. Like I'm not taking Kyron out on 3rd and 1. I'm not taking Tyree out on 3rd and 1 if they're already in the game. But as far as like, hey, look, we're going to 13, 14 personnel in the goal line, I think there is some merit for Sebo. And we not only did we see this last year, we saw this in 2019. I think he tied for – I'm going to look this up, but I thought he tied for the team lead in rushing touchdowns that year. And at least he was up in that conversation. I'm pulling that up now. But he had so Tony Jones had 6. Sebo had 5. So he was second. And he averaged 3.4 yards per carry because he had a lot of red zone scores, 1-2 yard red zone scores. So to me, could those guys do it? Sure. Would I have an issue if they wanted to make Sebo that short yardage back to let him take that pounding because he's willing to give it? No. I think Sebo's a guy to me that if they wanted to give him every 4th or 5th series, I'd be fine with that. I think Sebo's a good running back. I just think that, like you said, Vince, it's not as much about Sebo. It's more about the other two are just too good.
Correct.
Having said that, the more they use those two guys together, the more opportunity there is to then every 4th or 5th series get Sebo on the field. Because if they're not going to use those two backs together, then I don't want Sebo playing a lot because now you're taking away from Kyron and especially Chris Tyree. Correct. And I don't want to take snaps away from Chris Tyree. But if you're using those two guys together or Sebo and those two guys together, because not all three, but I'm saying Sebo and one of them. Because you could put Kyron outside with Sebo or Tyree in the backfield. But if you wanted to go Tyree and Sebo to give Kyron a breather, then you could put Chris Tyree out and run some screens and some different things to him too. So I think he is a good enough player. At the same time, Vince, he's clearly the number 3 back now. He's going to have to keep battling if he's going to keep that because there's a couple freshmen coming in this fall that Audric Estime and Logan Diggs that are going to be hard to keep off the field. But I love Sebo.
So do I.
He's another one of those kids that's had every reason in the world to transfer if he wanted to, but he doesn't because he loves Notre Dame and he wants to prove himself here. And I just have a special place in my heart for guys like that.
Sure.
I'm not a huge fan of transferring, but I also think there's merit to leaving. There's been guys that have left Notre Dame like, Jack Lamb needed to leave. What happened to him last year
was
he needed
unconscionable.
To go.
He needed to go.
What they did with Dracovic, he needed to leave.
Sure.
Some kids, it's like, come on, man, stick it out. Like, it's not that tough.
Right.
With Sebo, Avery Davis is another one, had every reason, every justification in the world to leave. Sebo has had every justification in the world to leave.
Yeah.
And he's been buried behind good backs, but he stuck it out, and I love that kid. So I'd like to see him have some success this year. And then maybe if he's good enough this year, he can then go be a 5th year somewhere else and be the guy. And that's what I'd love to see for Sebo.
Right.
But yes, I think he'll have a role this year, and I think it would make sense to take some of that pounding off of those other backs.
That's why I said you need that third back. If you want to be a real complete running team, you need that third back, and that he will fill that role just fine.
And when those other guys show up, this could be Notre Dame's best 1 through 5 running back depth chart in a very long time.
That is true. All right, Dylan says it's more of a philosophical question with recruiting. Is there an advantage to being the last visit for a recruit? For example, I think at the moment Notre Dame is the last scheduled visit for Sawchuk and C.J. Williams.
Boy, there's no easy answer.
It depends on the kid,
exactly.
To be honest with you, and the family
and circumstance.
Right.
So it's like this: if Notre Dame is sort of in that top, there's 2 ways to look at it. One is the advantage of having the first visit is now you set the bar for all the others. And for Notre Dame specifically, that can be a good thing.
Yes.
Because there is no other. Mike Elson was talking about this. I took a little shot at the SEC, which I loved. But Notre Dame is a unique place, and you set the bar for everybody else. So if you go to Notre Dame first, and then you're doing all this partying and all this, nonsense that these other schools do at these visits, you're like, man, this is fun, but they're not serious about the things that I'm serious about. So if a kid is a Notre Dame type of kid, that could have an impact for Notre Dame. And so Notre Dame sets that bar. I think that the other aspect of it is at times that first visit can be a deal breaker for a kid, especially if a kid's already leaning towards a school. Now, that could be good for Notre Dame if they have the first visit, but if a kid goes to his top school first and they knock it out of the park, it's kind of like it's going to be harder for you to then, with that last visit, when he's already now gone on 3 or 4 visits and he's kind of already determined where he wants to go.
Exactly. Yeah.
Then it can be harder, and it's a lot harder that final visit to knock it out. Now, if a kid is genuinely open or is leaning towards Notre Dame, then I like the last visit being Notre Dame. If a kid is usually I like being last, but at times I like being first. But normally, more often than not, and if we're in it where we're 1, 2, or 3, and I'm looking at like from a coach's standpoint, if we're 1, 2, or 3, and it's like a 1A, 1B, 1C, or a 1A, 1B, then I want the last shot.
Yeah.
If we're trailing and we're 4th out of 4, so like Gavin Sawchuk, I'd rather be first for him. My concern is you don't get to 4. If he's taken 4 visits, you don't get to be the 4th.
Yeah.
If Oklahoma is his school, if Oklahoma is his school and he goes there and they knock it out and they start doing, hey, we only got 1 spot left at running back and we need you to come and we got so and so coming, then it can be a little bit more challenging. But Notre Dame is actually going to be the second visit for Dallin Hayden. And that is, to me, my top back on the board right now. I actually have my running back big boards coming up this afternoon, if you're watching this on Friday. And it was real tight between 1 and 2. But Dallin Hayden is my number 1, and then Nicholas Singleton's my number 2. Those 2 guys will both be on campus before Gavin Sawchuk gets on campus. So it could end up being a deal where that doesn't matter in that regards anyway.
Guys have already committed.
Yeah. I hope I answered that question. There's no one easy answer, but if I had to only pick one, more often than not, I'd prefer to be last.
Makes sense.
With no context, I'd prefer to be last.
There's a couple questions in here from D. Beasy, and we love D. Beasy, but we already answered the one about what you're hearing, things like that. And then he had a Rocco Spindler, Blake Fisher question. I'll throw it up here, but are they going to have a shot at starting this year on the O-line? I'll let you kind of dabble into this one, but I think what you're hearing is they could get playing time, and they're definitely battling. Do you think that they have a shot to start?
I do. Okay. More so than I would have said before.
Okay.
I think they've surprised people with how good they've been and how
great surprise.
How mentally good they've been. And everyone knew they were physically talented, but the question about a freshman offensive lineman is there's so much technique and mental work involved that it's kind of like, can you really get it? But here's the thing that I'll say though, Vince, is one thing that Rocco has going for him is he's only played guard this spring. And that's my whole point. Whereas Andrew Kristofic's playing guard, center, they're moving him around. Rocco's had to focus on guard. Now, right and left guard, but it's still guard.
Right.
Blake Fisher's only played tackle. That's right and left tackle, but it's only tackle. And that's why I think they need to relax. Okay, here's who's legitimately starting for a job. Andrew Kristofic is not going to beat out Zeke Correll, so leave him at guard. Now, you want to put him at right and left guard? Go for it, but put him at guard. And let them battle, because then you can really see if Rocco is now having to face the same competition every day and he still steps in and says, hey, I'm the dude, then you're going to feel a lot better about him being the dude. But yes, I think they both have a shot at starting. I will be shocked if both of them start, barring injury. Unless there's injuries, I don't see both of them starting. I've heard Dylan Gibbons is having a great spring. So he is potentially, he's closer to locking down a spot than I thought he would have been this early in camp. But that's another reason guys need to be left at one position so they can really get comfortable. But they could both be there. Now, if you were to ask me what my perfect world scenario would be, would be in a situation regarding the freshman. I've already given my answer of my ideal starting lineup. Regarding the freshman is I wouldn't mind seeing a scenario in which they're rotating at a position. If they're clearly both good enough to start, and Tosh Baker's locked down right tackle or left tackle, Jarrett Patterson's going to start there and say, hey, look, we got to get these two guys in the field. So maybe they're both part of a rotation. I said rotating with the other. That's not what I meant. They're both rotating. So you've got, let's say you've got Dylan Gibbons starting at guard and you put Rocco behind him, and every third series give Rocco a shot. And then at right tackle, you have Tosh, and I've talked about this, Tosh and Blake rotating like we saw in 2017. I think would be good for both of them. So I could see a scenario in which they're both playing. I just don't know if we're going to see them both start barring injury. But the fact that they both are is great for them. They're as good as we thought they would be, if not better. But it's also a bit of a concerning sign because it means the veteran players that are coming back have not yet seized hold of those starting jobs. I
think that's what worries me more. I mean, it's great that the young guys are competing. I love that. I really do. But it has me concerned to a degree that the older guys haven't taken control. And so, we'll see how it goes, obviously. But
and along those same lines, yes. I did. If you have not seen this, okay, Dylan Hoffman says, ask D. Beasy, did you like the Spindler pancake block yesterday? If you have not seen this, go to irishbreakdown.com, click on the Practice 9 highlights clip, and it's about midway through. I put all the clips in order, and I say who's in each clip,
right?
So you can go find the one of Rocco. It looked a lot like that Quentin Nelson block against Georgia from 2017. Now, not as destructive as the Quentin Nelson block from against Georgia, but it's very similar, and it's just an impressive block, and it just shows his instincts and also his power. He lays Jordan Botelho out, and Botelho's like, I'm going to get a sack.
Yeah.
I see the opening sack, and bam, like lights out. Wakes up and it's Saturday, But it was a great block. But that's just an example of why Rocco is. I mean, he's a really good football player. There's no question about it.
Brian Connor is referencing our boy Tom Loy here. He said he put in a crystal ball for Devin Moore. Any thoughts on him and the state of safety recruiting?
I have not seen that. I don't really go to 247, but that doesn't surprise me. Devin Moore's a guy I like a lot. We've talked about him a little bit in the past, and honestly, I didn't think Notre Dame had much of a shot early on with this one, so I really like the fact they were in his top 5 for 6, I believe. But I didn't think they were going to be able to close the deal, but this would be a good one. And here's what I like about Devin Moore. So in the defense Marcus Freeman plays, you need a safety that can, one, play center field. Vince, you know this. When you're playing cover 1, you need a safety that can play the middle of the field and play, beyond the hashes from the middle of the field. You have to have it. And Devin Moore is a tall, rangy kid, and he's a wide receiver. And when you watch him play receiver, you really see that range, Vince. Like when he turns on the jets to run like go routes or post routes, this cat's covering some ground. And he plays at Naples High School in Florida. They play some good teams, and so I like that. The other one is you got to be able to cover, and he plays a lot of corner at Naples. I like that. And he's 6'1", probably about like 185. Really long and rangy. I like the kid a lot, Vince, and I think he's a guy that would be part of, if you can get him. I was actually talking about this with a friend today. I was doing some grocery shopping for my wife to help her get some stuff for her trip because she's been in meetings all morning. And he asked me, what would be your dream safety class if you can't have Xavier Nwankpa, who's actually visiting in June, officially visiting, but Ohio State's the clear leader right now. Who would be part of a safety group that would make you happy with this safety class? And the first 3 names that came to mind were Jake Pope, Devin Moore, and I'm drawing a blank. Sherrod Cavill from Virginia. You give me two of those 3, and I'm thrilled with the safety class. And it's not, Devin Moore's not like a top 50 player, but Devin Moore can flat out ball. So if they're able to win that one, it would certainly be big. And they're beating, SEC teams for him. He has an impressive offer list. So that would be big. And I have not seen that Tom put that out, but I don't think Tom would have put that out if he wasn't at least hearing some good things about where things stand with Devin. And, You know, I got somebody down there that said that recently that he thought Notre Dame had a much better shot than I thought they did. So I was glad to hear that. Now we'll see if they can get him on campus and close the deal. If you haven't watched Devin Moore's film, do so. He's a very good football player. And I'm going to be releasing my safety board next week. And some people might be surprised with how he ranks on that.
Okay. Jack says, I would take C.J. Williams, Morris, etc., but I don't really see too much explosiveness in those guys. If Indy were to land a group of Williams, Morris, and Walker, what would you grade that class?
So, Vince, this is an interesting take by Jack because he's making a similar point that I believe, and that is C.J. Williams is really good. Tyler Morris is really good. The problem is they're very similar players, not style-wise. Right. Tyler's more of a slot X. You know, he's got some shiftiness to him. He's T.J. Jones. I've compared him to T.J. Jones.
Okay.
C.J. Williams is sort of a Juju Smith-Schuster guy to me. And, you know, with a little less maybe vertical speed, but more of a chain mover, a Javon McKinley-esque build, a little shorter, guy that's going to 3rd and 5 is going to be a monster, you know, could catch 80 balls for 1,000 yards, but he's not going to be a guy that's stretching the field and
he's not running away
deep a whole lot. Yeah. Tyler Morris, I like a lot. He's a TJ Jones guy, but again, not a burner. The concern you have with if you put that group together is you've got really good football players, but there's the fear of, okay, who stretches the field? I'm just not as obsessed with that as some people are. I'm really not. I've had that. Look, I've said this before. In the last 15 years, there's been 4 Notre Dame receivers that have led the team in catches as receivers and averaged 17 yards per catch or more. It's Michael Floyd, Golden Tate, Will Fuller, and Javon McKinley. Javon McKinley averaged 17 yards a catch this year. Smoked Clemson, smoked Asante Samuel, who I'm constantly seeing projected to be in the first round. There's other ways to get open than just running by people. T. Higgins ran almost a 4.6 at his pro day, and he averaged like 18 yards per catch during his career. Did anyone question his speed when he was smoking Nick McLeod, when Nick McLeod was still at NC State, or when he was smoking Notre Dame in the Cotton Bowl? I understand where Jack's coming from, and I do think there are some concerns. But number one, I think there's some explosiveness in the older classes. I think there's some explosiveness at the running back position, you know, Lorenzo Styles, Xavier Watts, guys like that. And then you have to say, okay, now you have to make sure that in the 2023 receiver class, you got to focus on some guys. But what I would like to see them do, Jack, is take those two and Morris if you can. But at that point in time, you have to say we got to find another room for a 4th receiver, and we've got to get Xavier Bradshaw. That would be my concern, is you land those two guys who are really good football players and then not take Xavier Bradshaw. That to me would be a mistake. So I do think there's a need, and maybe you could still – or Xavier Bradshaw and Tobias Merriweather. You got to get one of those two guys to me. And you just say, hey, look, we're going to go with the bigger class. But that's what I would see. But I would grade it. I'd give it probably a B+, because, again, those are good football players. B+ for sure, and that means top 10 to 12 receiver group. Yeah. Right. You know, so B to B+ for me is a pretty good grade based on how I give it. It's just, again, that lack of big playability would be the thing that keeps it from and the third guy being such a project, low floor ceiling, you know, low floor guy in a Amorian Walker, it wouldn't it would have me happy with it, but a little bit concerning.
Speaking of floors and ceilings, Moore versus Pope, both low-rated guys with high ceilings, in my opinion. This is from Dylan. Which one would you prefer, and which is more likely? Might be different answers.
Well, it's hard to say who's more likely because, again, we got to get these kids on campus. We got to see them get on campus to these different places and go.
I think come June, recruiting is just going to fall on its – I mean, not fall on its face, but, like, everything's going to get flipped, turned upside down.
Guys that we don't think Notre Dame is going to get now, they're going to get. Guys that we don't think – that we think they're going to get or not.
It's just going to be like, oh, wow, I didn't realize this, or I didn't realize – I mean, it's going to be it's going to be nutty starting in June, I think.
Dylan, I have not graded them both. Right. So, and the reason what I mean by that is I watch film and I get a gut feel. I like this guy more than that guy, but then I grade them out and it doesn't always turn out that way.
Yeah.
And for example, at running back, how my running back board is going to shape out is not exactly how I thought it would based on my gut feel. But that's why I created the grading system that I did, because it helps me to protect myself from my own biases.
Sure.
Right. And that's what I think that's what you need to do as a coach, because everybody has a bias. Some guys like bigger players, some guys like faster players, some guys like, players that are already technically sound. Some guys like guys that, there's all types of different things that you look for. And so that's why I tried to create a balanced grading system. So I don't know who would grade out higher. Honestly, my answer is, which one would you prefer? My answer would be yes. I mean, also, give me both, give me either. It's a win-win situation for me.
Yeah.
I don't know if I could say which one I like better right now. I don't have a gut between the two of them. I think that what I like about Devin Moore is he brings to me, he's a little bit rangier and a better pure cover player than Jake Pope. I think Jake Pope is more explosive athletically. I think Jake Pope would make a better receiver than Devin Moore. He could play both ways. I think Jake Pope is a little bit more of a playmaker. Devin Moore is more of a cover guy, free safety type. So they both have strengths over the other, but they're very similar in what their roles would be. And I like them both. I don't know who I would take. If I had to probably pick one, I'd probably go with Devin Moore, but ask me again in 15 minutes and I'll probably change my mind. I mean, it's really close. It's really close. If they get either one of those guys, I'm happy. Get both of them for all I care.
Right.
Be thrilled with that.
Okay, let's see here. Oh, somebody's calling you out, by the way. Thomas is calling you out. Brian, I still have NCAA 14 for Xbox 360. Here's my gamer tag. I'm challenging you. I love it.
Tommy and I are going to have some words after this podcast.
If my son still had his 360, I'd be jumping on there.
And what's this 666 stuff? I'm not playing some dude worshiping the devil, Tommy. We're going to have a little conversation after this podcast is over. All right. So wait a minute. So I'm going to date myself a little bit here. I have not played an NCAA game in like 5 or 6 years. So you can actually play people that aren't sitting next to you.
Yeah. Yes. And that's pretty much what anybody does anymore. They don't do the whole. You got to put the headset on, and I always think my son's talking to me, and he's not. He's always talking to other people that he's never met before.
Interesting.
So that's where we're at, my friend. It's unfortunate.
You buy me an Xbox 360, Tommy, and we'll play.
Right, exactly. Brian has kind of a wide open question here, and I'm not sure which direction you want to take this. He says, with the 4-game freshman rule, what freshmen and what games would you like to see them play? That is such a wide open question because, I would like to see a lot of the freshmen play at some point. And I don't necessarily care which game it is. It just depends on the flow of the game and kind of how things are going. What was it? Was it last year or the year before was it the Ball State game when Notre Dame basically practiced all of their younger guys in preparation to get them in the game, and it bit them in the butt.
Right.
Because
none of them got in the game.
Right. That's exactly right. You can't plan for stuff like that. You can have that as a contingency plan and things like that, but don't make it your
Notre Dame
priority.
has to do that because the scout team guys don't practice.
Correct. Well, good point.
Don't get the reps. So that needs to change. But to me,
that needs to change.
Okay. So I can't tell you specifically which games, because like Vince said, it just depends on how the game is going. I would have said most of those guys would have got in against Duke last year. Right. They didn't. I would have thought those guys would have got against Georgia Tech last year. They didn't. That's the two crappy teams with crappy defenses that Notre Dame couldn't really score on the way that everybody else scored on them.
Sure.
So obviously you look at the schedule. The way I like to do the 4-game thing is I like to kind of mix it up a little bit. I don't want a guy to get his 4 games in the first 5, so I don't want to see him blow out Florida State, blow out Toledo, blow out Wisconsin, and the same kids are getting their 4 games in then, just because then you're in a pickle if you late in the season you have some injuries you need to prepare for. I also think it keeps them less engaged. Hey, I've played my 4. They told me I'm redshirting, so no,
I'm done. I'm out.
So I kind of like mixing it up a little bit. So maybe week 1 blowout, you play Deion Colsey and get him a little bit of work, and then maybe the next time you play Jaden Thomas in there instead. So I'm receiver if you're going to redshirt those guys. Although I'm not a huge fan. I probably should use a different example because I'm not a huge fan of redshirting wide receivers. That. But, offensive line, you get Caleb Johnson in the first game and then you get Joe Alden in the next time, that kind of thing, right? So I would mix it up a little bit. The guys that I would prioritize playing early are guys that you think could help you at some point in time this season. So, Deion Colsey, this would be a better example to use him. I'd like to see him play early. I'd like to see Prince Colley, who might be a redshirt, play early, because then you give him those reps to say, hey, you know what? This guy's a little bit too good not to play. That's who I would prioritize early. But in theory, if a guy is going to redshirt, so we're talking offensive linemen, we're talking Mitchell Evans at tight end. maybe one of the two running backs, those kind of players. All three of the young defensive edge, Jason Onye, Schweitzer, and Devin Upal, those guys would all be players that I would say spread it out. But Kerry G, who may end up playing more, get him a chance early. Prince Collie early. Deion Colsey early.
You may decide to take those red shirts off.
Exactly. But you don't want to wait till midway through the season to find out when this guy gets on the field, he's really flipping good, because then you could have helped him. He could have helped you against Wisconsin or USC or something like that. So that's kind of how I would go about it.
And I'm okay with getting, using one of those red shirt games on special teams. There's something to be said, and we don't know if the stadiums are going to be full and blah blah blah. But in a normal year, which I'm very much hoping that we have in the fall, there's something to be said for getting on the field, even on special teams. You run down on the kickoff team or on the punt return team or whatever in front of 80,000 people, right? Because it's different to stand on the sidelines in front of 80,000 and then to get on the field in front of 80,000, right?
Yeah.
And so
agreed.
I would not necessarily reserve a spot on special teams or whatever, but I would try to get as many of those guys, at least a rep or two.
Well, they did that a little bit with Maris Luafau in 2019, which I thought was smart.
Yes.
Now, what I would do is I would do that in games, and I'd have to go back and look and see if this was, in fact, what they did in 2019. They actually put Osita Ekwonu and Maris Luafau in games on the coverage teams to start games in 2019, and they still both redshirted.
Right.
I would say, and I don't know if they did what I'm about to say. I'd have to go back and look at the specific games, but I would do it against teams that you think you're going to have a shot at getting them in the game later. That's what I would do. So, like, if you want to put, let's say that you don't travel Prince Collie. Let's say Prince Collie's not quite ready to say, hey, I deserve to play right now. Let's just say that hypothetically, for an example. In the opener against Florida State. It's a road game. It's a little different animal. You don't have all those kids with you because you don't travel everybody. You travel to Florida State. Maybe he doesn't make that trip. Maybe Kerry G doesn't make that trip because they're not quite there yet. Sure. They're darn sure going to be starting on my kickoff and punt coverage team against Toledo the next week.
Right.
Because that's a game where, let's be honest, Toledo's a good football team. They're still a MAC team. That's still a game Notre Dame should be up by 3+ touchdowns in the fourth quarter.
Yes, no question.
But I'm not doing it against Wisconsin. Because then you've literally just blown it in a game where they're probably only going to play special teams. I'd like it to be a game where there's a chance you could get them to do both. And if it doesn't work out that way, it doesn't work out that way.
Sure, that makes a lot of sense.
But
maximize the game that you have to use for these guys. Don't just blow it on one rep. Basically.
But I'll say this. If a guy is good enough to be a starter on 3 or 4 different special teams, that to me is worth using a redshirt year, unless it's a unique situation like with what we had with Romeo Okwara in 2012, where he was 16 years old.
Yeah, right.
Or Jeremiah Wusu when he was a freshman, and Notre Dame wisely redshirted Jeremiah Wusu-Koromo. They couldn't have known that he was going to turn into what he was.
No.
But, he was 17 years old and young and needed to develop his body. Those guys are exceptions to the rule. Yes, you need to, because you don't want a guy to get injured. If a guy's young like Romeo was, I would have loved to have seen Romeo get a 6th year or 5th year. That would have been awesome. But in most cases, I'm fine if you're going to play a guy as a freshman if he's starting on all your special teams. Because you can't say special teams is as important as offense and defense, and then say, yeah, but we're not going to blow a guy's red shirt even just to use him as a starter. Would I use a guy to just do? Would I blow Prince Collie's red shirt or Kerry G's red shirt just to use him as a kickoff cover guy? No. Right. But if he's going to be on kickoff coverage, kick return, and punt cover, yeah, okay. Or sure, go for it. So that's where I'm at. Or use him as a punt cover and a punt return guy. Sure, go for it. You burn the red shirt because that guy's playing football. And if he's that good as a special teams player as a freshman, chances are he's going to be a guy who's battling for a starting job here in the next couple of years.
That's exactly right. All right, Brian, it is 2:00, so I have to roll to class. Do you see where we're at over there in the comments?
I do.
Excellent. Yep. Thank you, everybody. Yep. Again, my favorite hour of the week. And so I love all the comments, and Brian's going to be doing this for a while.
You get like some kind of substitute teacher next week, Vince, that can kind of cover you need like a TA. You need like a teacher's assistant on Fridays. This is
as long as you guys, as long as you guys don't mind like basketballs and stuff in the background, maybe I'll jump back on. We'll see what happens.
Okay.
So, all right.
We wouldn't say no.
I'll see you guys later.
All right. See you, Vince. All right. This is Tommy Davidson. Hey, Coach D. Hey, Tommy. Appreciate you being in the show, my man. Here we go. I'm going to try and see. Okay, this is Jeff Bowdrin. says, not sure if I can go there with this topic, but can you compare BK at this point in his career, Bobby Bowden and Tom Osborne before they won their first national title? Can't win the big one. I think those are great comparisons. Great comparisons. I'm going to look this up. Brian Kelly's not anywhere close, I don't believe, to where Bobby Bowden was when he won his first title. And I'm going to look these up as we're answering this question. And honestly, the reason it's a little different situation for me with Brian Kelly and those coaches, because Tom Osborne took over in 1973, didn't win his first title at Nebraska till 1994. So Brian Kelly still has almost a decade to be at Nebraska before you get to Tom Osborne, and he won 3 in his final 4 years. Bobby Bowden took over at Florida State in 1976 and won his first title in 1993. Now, when he took over Florida State, they were not a legitimate big-time program, so it's a little different situation. And but here's the thing for me. I think Brian Kelly is very much in the situation right now that they were in the lead up to their first title, Jeff. So even though Brian Kelly's not going to be here for another 9 or 10 years, he got the job a little bit later. He'd been a head coach for a while when he got the job, and it's a different era. Guys don't stay at places 30 years anymore, especially Notre Dame. So it's a little different animal. But to specifically draw the parallels, I think that Brian Kelly is sort of in that, he's creeping up on being the kind of program. And what took Nebraska over the top, right? Nebraska had some good football teams. Nebraska had a lot of really, really good football teams. But I think what took Nebraska over the top, in my opinion, is in regards to winning a championship, is they got a little bit more dynamic skill. Amon Green, Lawrence Phillips, but they had a dynamic quarterback that could get them over the top, and Tommy Frazier, and a great defense. So that's what got them over the top. And you look at Florida State. What got Florida State? I mean, Florida State had a lot of good They had a dynamic quarterback and Charlie Ward. And I don't think their overall talent everywhere else was necessarily better on that 93 team than it was in previous years when they couldn't beat Miami. I think what helped Florida State was, one, that was when Miami started to fade. That was the beginning of the end for Miami in that era. That's point number one. Point number two is they got a dynamic quarterback in Charlie Ward, and that put them, to me, over the top. That's where Notre Dame is we've talked about this. That's where Notre Dame is lacking. They've got to get better quarterback play. That doesn't necessarily have to mean a Heisman Trophy winner or anything like that. And remember, one of the years Nebraska won a title, Tommy Frazier got hurt and missed a good chunk of the year, but they were good enough to still keep winning, but he was back when it was time to go win a title. So to me, you get a quarterback. Let me ask you this question, Jeff. Think about this. In 2018, if you could switch quarterbacks, and this is not no disrespect to Ian Book, because we're talking about one of the best freshman quarterbacks ever to play the game and a guy that's going to be the number one pick in the NFL draft. But if you switch quarterbacks in 2018, I'd put Notre Dame against anybody. I really would. If you put Lamar Jackson, who was in college at the time, on the 2017 Notre Dame team, I think Notre Dame has a shot to beat anybody. If you take the 2015 Notre Dame team and they had a playmaker quarterback and you give them better defensive coaches and a better strength program, I'll put that team up against anybody. We've seen years where Notre Dame had the talent at almost every position to go toe-to-toe with anybody. We saw it in 2017. They lost to the eventual national runner-up by a point. And they had plenty of opportunities in the fourth quarter to win that game. And they didn't even have their best receivers on the field. Chase Claypool and Miles Boykin barely played that game. So I think Notre Dame is a lot closer talent-wise than people think at every position except for one. And that, to me, is the difference. Tom Osborne didn't win a title till he got Tommy Frazier. Bobby Bowden didn't win a title till he got Charlie Ward. And he had NFL quarterbacks before that. But Charlie Ward was different. Tommy Frazier was different. And that, to me, is where the comparison ends and where Notre Dame needs to be. Dylan Hoffman asks, are Joe Wilkins, Avery Davis, Braden Lindsey, Kevin Austin, and Lawrence Keys all gone next year, or do any of them have any years of eligibility? Well, first of all of them have an extra year of eligibility. All of them. Avery Davis could get a sixth year because of the COVID year. And that's the thing, Dylan, is the COVID year has made it to where You could find some unique situations where all of them come back. I don't think all of them will. I don't know if any of them will. I think that Joe Wilkins, I don't know if bringing him back would be a great idea. We'll have to see what he does this year, but he's a good football player, but not to me, a needle mover. He's more of a guy that should be in a rotation. I think if Kevin Austin has a big year this year, the only way you'd want to bring Kevin Austin back is if he has a big year and he proves himself to be the guy you think he could be. If he gets hurt again or doesn't maximize his potential, it's time to move on. But at the same time, if Kevin Austin has a big year, he may say, look, all the things have gone on. I need to strike while the iron's hot and go pro. So I don't see Kevin Austin coming back. Braden Lindsey and Lawrence Keys are interesting ones. I could see one or both of them coming back depending on the kind of years they have. If Braden Lindsey, however, has a big year, he may want to say, do I want to risk another year potentially getting injured? I'm finally healthy. Those are all interesting, tough questions. And I don't see Avery Davis coming back for a 6th year either, because I think he's going to be good enough this year to say, hey, it's time to go test the NFL waters. So all of them could come back. I think at most I'd say 2 of that group come back in 2022. I don't think it'd be any more than that. And there's a much better chance it's less than there are more. And then to follow up, Dylan asks, if that's the case, do you think Notre Dame could take 4 wide receivers this year? I really wish they wouldn't have taken Walker so soon. Much rather have taken Nicholas Anderson instead of him. I agree. I would have much rather had Nicholas Anderson than Amorian Walker, but you can't now also take Nicholas Anderson and Amorian Walker because neither of them are high enough upside or high enough ceiling guys to be that. And that was to me, was the issue. So I just, I don't think you can take 4 receivers because to me, I don't think Notre Dame's working with the assumption that many of those guys are coming back. I don't think if 3 or 4 of those receivers leave, that all of a sudden Notre Dame's thinking, oh, wow, we thought Kevin Austin was going to come back for a 5th year, or we thought that, these guys were coming back for 5th years, or Avery Davis is coming back for a 6th year. I don't think those were part of the equation with Notre Dame. So I don't think that they necessarily are accounting those guys when they're talking about the scholarship situation anyway. So I don't think that's going to impact taking a 4th receiver. I think right now when you look at Jordan Johnson, Xavier Watts, Jay Brunell, Lorenzo Styles, Deion Colsey, Jaden Thomas, plus a couple of those guys coming back, 1 or 2 of those guys coming back, plus this incoming freshman class, numbers are already pretty tight. So you have 3 this year. You had 3 last year and 3 the year before that. That's 9 right there, plus the potential of bringing back 1 or 2 of Wilkins, Lindsey, and Keys. That's a lot of receivers. Plus, you're going to bring in hopefully 2 tight ends again this year. I just don't know if numbers-wise it would make sense to bring in a 11th or 12th or 13th wide receiver, depending on who comes back. So I don't think it'll get to a 4th based on that. I think the way you get to a 4th is if somebody that's an underclassman transfers. I'm not going to name names because there's no one in particular I have in mind. But just pick any of the freshman or sophomore receivers. If somebody gets beat out, kind of like we saw with Kendall Abdul-Rahman, if another one of those situations happen, that's when I think you could see them maybe say, hey, we're gonna take a 4th wide receiver in this class. So hopefully that answers your question. All right. Matt D says, Nana Osafo-Mensah is freaking huge now. The tweet he put out of himself the other day, his biceps gained 5 pounds each. And Nana's jacked. But more importantly, Matt, the thing I've liked is he's flashing on film too. I've seen at least 4 or 5 highlights now of Nana really blowing up on the edge. And it's been, some of them are run downs and some of them are pass downs. Now, if Nana can step up this year and force his way into the rotation as the 3rd big end, or if somebody goes down, because if somebody gets hurt at 3 technique, you could maybe see Myron move back inside and Nana plays more, but more so just say, hey, look, even if he's not playing a ton, get 5-10 snaps a game, maybe get him in a goal line package. But now you're feeling really good about going into 2022 with the combination of Justin Adamiola and Nana with Myron gone to the NFL. So him stepping up this year is really, really big for Notre Dame and big for him. He's battled injury. I think people have kind of already written him off, which is crazy because he's still only a redshirt sophomore. He's got plenty of time left. And if Notre Dame really wanted him back, he could get a 6th year because of the COVID year. So it's good to see him not only jacked up, but more importantly, to be playing well. Joseph Kramer asks, does Notre Dame have a realistic chance with Arch Manning or getting him to visit? Getting him to visit, possibly. Peyton visited Notre Dame, I believe. As far as do they have a chance to get him, I don't see that. I don't see that happening. I think the Mannings are very savvy people. They understand how this works. And one of the things that factored into where they all went was they wanted to go somewhere where they felt confident in the who was going to develop them. And Peyton went to Tennessee because there was a lot of faith in David Cutcliffe as the offensive coordinator at the time. And then, of course, he was the head coach at Ole Miss when Eli went to Ole Miss. They're going to go somewhere with a proven – and this is smart. This is very smart. They're going to go somewhere that has a proven track record of developing quarterbacks. And I think even the biggest of Notre Dame homers has to say, like, look, Notre Dame doesn't have a track record of developing quarterbacks, whether it be developing to be maximizing their potential in college, improving their games as they get older. No one could argue that Ian Book was a better player as a senior as he was his previous 2 years. I don't think you can make that argument. The numbers certainly don't represent that, despite playing a weak schedule, and every other quarterback regressed. So I just don't think Notre Dame has the resume from a coaching standpoint to really ultimately attract Arch Manning and that family to send him to Notre Dame. Now, maybe if they hire, something happens and there's a change, maybe, but I just don't see that happening, and I don't see him being a realistic player. I think a guy like Dante Moore is a guy they have a better shot with as far as being an elite 5-star quarterback. All right, David, welcome to the show. Thanks for joining us. See, here we go. Okay, Richard Maltby, this is an interesting question, Richard. In your opinion, looking into the future, what's the most favorable year that Brian Kelly can get us over the hump and get us that elusive national championship? I believe he has until 2024. I would agree with you on the end game, and that's when his contract comes up. I don't think Brian Kelly is going to get another extension, and if he does, it's simply an extension that protects you on the recruiting trail and gets him more money when he retires. I don't see him coaching past 2024. The year as far as getting him over the hump, honestly, for me, it's 2022. And there's a couple reasons for it. Number one, I think a lot of the skill players that are going to step up this year as the top guys will be back the next year. Michael Mayer is going to be back, obviously, but at least Chris Tyree is going to be back. We'll see if Kyron Williams is. They'll be good at running back. The other thing is you're probably going to have at least 4 starting offensive linemen back from that team, which is going to be good. The second year of the new starting line is going to be better. You're going to see a lot of guys on defense coming back. Some of the guys that they're going to lose on defense, hopefully you're in position to replace them. I mean, they're going to lose Kyle Hamilton, but they should still be okay there. But because they're going to step up at other positions. I think they have a lot of players coming back. And the other thing, Richard, is I think their schedule sets up very favorably in that you may think it's an incredibly challenging schedule, which is very true. But number one is if you split with Ohio State and Clemson, and the loss is competitive, then the reality is you're then going to have a much better resume. There's a lot. North Carolina's on that schedule. USC's on that schedule. Stanford's on that schedule. So the point being that that's a year we say Notre Dame can get in with a loss if it's a competitive loss. And there's a good chance that you could knock out one of those perennial playoff teams if you beat them, especially if you beat them convincingly enough. So, let's say Notre Dame loses to Ohio State at home in a close game and then goes on the road and smacks Clemson around. Clemson's out, right? Because the ACC schedule alone is probably not good enough to get them in, although I do believe they play Georgia. I think that's when they start their Georgia series in 22. I could be wrong on that. But you may knock them out. Well, that benefits Notre Dame because now you've already knocked one of those teams out. And so I think that 2-year stretch is going to be Brian Kelly's best year from a combination of schedule that sets up nicely, enough top-end talent to be really a great resume, kind of like the 2017 schedule, where if Notre Dame beats Miami and beats Stanford, they're getting in with 1 loss. They'd had 6 wins over top 25 teams. The 2022 schedule is going to be a lot like that. But then also you have the talent, in my opinion, at all positions in 22 and 23 to make that run, which is why I could see some players coming back in 2022 that might surprise us because they are going to see it too. They're going to say, you know what, we got a chance to make a run. Let's go make that run. All right, Patrick, my man, thank you so much for the super chat there. Appreciate that very, very much. Appreciate you, brother. Appreciate you too. Kendall close strong on this receiver class. I am concerned. Thank you. Patrick, I'm concerned as well. The reality is however, if Notre Dame is going to close at receiver, it's not going to just be Dell. I think even more than Dell, I think this is a big opportunity for Tommy Rees. I think Tommy Rees, if he can go out and kind of overcome some of those deficiencies they've had up to this point, it's going to say a lot about him as a recruiter, as in a positive manner. But I also think that what they're doing is You're seeing Coach Alexander be a little bit more active right now, especially with 2023 guys. They're getting some of these players that they've been behind on campus. Can they overcome it with that? So, yeah, can he close strong? I think so. Look, here's my thoughts on this, Patrick. Del Alexander came to Notre Dame with a very strong reputation as a recruiter and a position coach. I loved the hire when it was made. So it's not like he's incapable of correcting course and getting it done. I think he is capable of it. Will we see it or not? That's a good question. But I think he's capable of it. And especially if for some of these receivers that maybe aren't making decisions during the summer, if they can get some of these guys to, if some of these players are not going to commit, or maybe they commit to another schools, but Notre Dame stays on them. If the offense does this fall what I think it's going to do, or maybe I should say hope it's going to do, then now you're in position to flip these guys. Because, look, the game has changed, right? Just because guys commit doesn't mean that, okay, well, that guy's not on the board anymore. If he's still talking to you, then you keep talking to him. And maybe then they could flip a guy or two, because it doesn't take many. It just takes one big flip of a top player to make it happen. So could he do it? Yes. Yes, he can. He can close strong. He's capable of it. He's a good coach, and he's has had moments where he's been known as a good recruiter. We just have to see him do it, Patrick. I mean, that's the big thing, is he's just got to step up and do it. All right, here we go. Notre Dame 2164. If you could make one thing instantly happen in Notre Dame to close the gap to elite status, what would it be? Give him an elite quarterback. I believe that. I mean, that would be the key. Give him I think that if they can only do one thing, that's it, right? Give him an elite quarterback. I think give him a Trevor Lawrence, give him a Kyler Murray, that kind of guy. If you could give Notre Dame that kind of player, then I think that's a big impact. We've seen it in past years. If you'd have had that kind of quarterback in 2018 or 2017, I think Notre Dame competes for, if not wins a title one of those 2 years. I think they had that. Give him a Joe Burrow, and I think that happens. So that would be where I'm at. All right, here we go. Let's find some questions here. I'm glad you liked the answer. That was our question. If you just joined us, we talked about the different who's going to play what positions on the defensive line and how they would fit into the offense. So if you did not see that when the show is over, you can go back and look. All right, Richard Maltby. So this is a good one. So what did the coaches mean when they said the best thing that happened to Jordan Botelho was sending him home? So about this time, a little over a year ago, before spring ball started, we had an insider report at Irish Breakdown and this is back when we had a message board, and I cannot wait till we get it back. I'm getting very frustrated with that, but hopefully that'll be back within the next month or so, is what I'm hoping. This is what they're telling me. We'll see. But I had a report that came out that was from our inside, some of the sources I had, that basically was he was getting pretty close to being sent home, even if everyone else wasn't. He was not adjusting well and not doing the things that, he needed to do to adapt to Notre Dame, and was, getting in some trouble doing dumb freshman things, which you do enough dumb freshman things, you're not being brought back. And it's not the Notre Dame football coach's decision. When everybody had to go home, right? So when the pandemic hit and they canceled the spring, and then they ended up making the decision as a school to do basically distance learning for the rest of the semester, and everybody got sent home, Jordan had to go home and back to his family, which is from what I'm told, a very strong family, very supportive family, but also a family that'll, say, hey, you need to get yourself going. And so him going home kind of stopped that bleeding, but then also there was a lot of learning lessons he had to learn from the coaches, from the family. Say, hey, you want to be a part of what we're doing here? We want you. You have great talent, potential. But when you come back, you got to have a different attitude. You got to be more serious about going to class and doing the right things and following the rules and giving us the effort and showing up on time and those kind of things. And when he came back, he didn't have any more strikes against him because he got sent home, and it was a time to reflect and grow up. And he came back with a different mentality. And now in the spring, he's even built on that even more. And there's a lot of excitement about him. So does that answer your question, Richard? Let me know. But that's what they're referring to, is basically being sent home forced him to grow up a lot, because he was making a lot of mistakes. And there were some, not ultimatums, but there were some come to Jesus conversations with Jordan Botelho between him and the Notre Dame coaches, and him and his family. All right, let's see if we have some more questions here. A lot of conversation going on in the chat. I love it, y'all. Love it. This is great, you guys. We're really like the community we're building. Okay, Thomas Leonard. Who do you think is going to be the spring game all-star that probably won't see the field this season? I have no idea, and I am not looking forward to the conversations that we're going to have if some quarterback doesn't play great, and we have to listen to people talk about how the spring game should impact why he should or shouldn't play. Or some guy has a great spring game that we know isn't a legitimate contender. I mean, was it Nate Montana won a spring game? Brian Kelly's first spring game MVP. The spring game is a fun time. It's not meant to be something we necessarily take a lot from in regards to this guy's going to start. This guy has a great future. Doesn't mean we can't learn some things, but we need to always be careful about putting too much emphasis on that. Dylan Hoffman asks, Is Lawrence Keys going to see significant time this year, in your opinion? Seems to be having an impressive camp thus far. It's way too early to definitely be locking him into that. We have still 5 more practices plus the spring game, all the summer workouts, and then over 20 fall camp practices before that's going to shake out. What I'm excited about is I'm hearing good things about Lawrence, but then we're seeing him make big play after big play after big play in every practice. And that is huge, because I think when you go back to 2019, when Lawrence got a chance to play early, because remember, you had Braden Lindsey was hurt and Michael Young was hurt, and there was a lot going on. So he was thrust into the lineup. He made a huge third down catch against Louisville of a ball that was away from his body. It was on a slant route. And then he set up a score against Georgia on a great outside one-on-one play. So anytime Lawrence has been given a shot to play and make plays, that's exactly what he does. He makes plays. He's a talented player who has some of that explosiveness that Brian Kelly always says they don't have. When he was right, it wasn't on the field, but they had it. It was just sitting on the sidelines. And he battled an illness last year, and I think that hurt him a little bit too. He's healthy now, and I'm excited to see what he's going to do. All right. This is a good question. Now, David, I'm sorry, but Vince is not here anymore. Vincenzo is not here. When can I come to the crib and eat some baked ziti? You're going to have to ask Vince that one. Although I think I probably make more Italian food than he does, because I'm not Italian. I'm Irish, but my wife is Italian. So she's taught me how to make really good Italian food. How does the coaching staff determine who plays during the course of the game between head coach, coordinators, and positional coaches? So they're all involved in that conversation. Those are things that are established during the week. They make decisions about, okay, here's our rotation for the week. Here's who's going to play. Here's the type of scenarios in which we want to get these guys on the field. These are the times when this guy is going to, we're going to put him in on this play we have designed for him. So you think of an example of like the USC Notre Dame game in 19, they put Braden Lindsey in to kind of set him up for that big reverse. That was something that you talk about. The position coaches and the coordinators are ultimately going to set that initial look, and the coordinator is going to have the final say in most instances, at least at the skill positions. Offensive line's a little different. Jeff Quinn is naturally going to have a little bit more of a say than a receivers coach or a running backs coach. But then Brian Kelly has always been a guy that will step in and say, hey, I want this guy to play, or I want that to happen. And if the head coach says that, then that's ultimately what you got to do. All right. Here we go. Christopher asked, how big of an issue is Carell and Kristofic being sub 300 pounds? It's not an issue to me. Robert Hainsey was under 300 pounds his entire Notre Dame career. Zach Martin was under 300 pounds for all but 1 year of his Notre Dame career. It's not about the weight. It's about whether or not you can move people, whether or not you have power and punch and a strong lower body. Those are the things that matter to me. I mean, Zeke Carell at 295 is at 295 at like 6'2.5". He's going to have more of a strong base than a 6'7" guy at 305 is going to have. So I'm not too worried about that. It doesn't matter to me, to be completely honest with you. Jason asks, the transfer portal has been very quiet so far with the spring semester ending soon for a lot of schools. Do you think Notre Dame picks up another transfer this year? Cornerback, safety, DN, O tackle help. So let me address a couple of those positions as we talk about this. I won't be shocked if Notre Dame picks up a grad transfer. The problem, Jason, is I think they're going to have to lose somebody before they can gain somebody, because they're really close to already being, this year it's not as important because you don't have the 85 scholarship limit, but at the same time, there's still some deep position groups, and you don't necessarily want to bring a guy in, and then that causes you to lose 2 young guys that you're going to really need that next year. So that's what I mean by they're going to have to lose somebody to then be able to bring that in. To me, Tackle help, I don't want it. I don't want a graduate transferred offensive tackle, develop or offensive guard or center. And I've heard that the staff is looking at interior players in the past. We'll see if that continues after the year. But here's the deal. Number one, coach up the guys you have. And if a guy was a difference maker, this is my whole thing about the transfer portal. If a guy was a difference maker, he'd be going to the NFL if he was a grad transfer, right? That's the part of it. Now, they've opened up transferring in general, so maybe but if a guy's a difference maker and he's an underclassman, chances are he's not leaving the school he's at. I don't, and if a guy's buried somewhere, what are the odds that a guy's buried and he's going to come to Notre Dame and beat out a bunch of other guys? So I don't know if we're going to see Notre Dame really get a lot. The other thing too is, and Jason, I know you know this, it's a lot harder for Notre Dame to get get transfers in than it is grad transfers and high school recruits, just because it's a tougher admission sell. If a kid goes to Alabama, or Clemson's a better example, Georgia, is a better example. If a kid goes to Georgia and he takes the classes that I'm told the kids take when they go to Georgia, the kid's going to have a hard time transferring to Notre Dame just because he's not going to have any credit. It's like, dude, we're not taking any of these classes. You're going to have to start over from scratch, and Notre Dame's not going to do that. So that can be very, very challenging. Safety help, I could see that. I could see corner help, although, again, it's going to have to be a pretty darn good football player. I think those are probably the two positions where I could see Notre Dame benefiting from a transfer situation, would be corner and safety. Possibly linebacker. I don't think they need DN help, to be completely honest with you. I think it's another situation of coach up the guys you have. Between Foskey and Batelho at Viper, you've got Myron Tungavaloa, you've got Justin Adamiola, Nana at big end. I don't see a guy now. Look, if a sophomore that's going to be a top 10 NFL draft pick in 2022 wants to transfer to Notre Dame, when I look at that guy, yeah, that's true of any position. But that's just not going to happen more often than not. So I don't think that's going to be there. Fortnite Blaze, I see your question. Vince is not here, so I'm not going to ask it because that is for Vince. Maybe next week we'll try to get that question in a little sooner so Vince can answer it. All right, Dylan Hoffman asks, we've spoken about this before, but is BK starting to get more involved with the top dogs on the recruiting trail? From articles, it seems like he's made contact with each of the big three running backs. So we have talked about this before. The last month and a half is the most active I've ever seen Brian Kelly on the recruiting trail, which is great news. And this is why Notre Dame is making movement. And we're not just seeing it with the big three running backs and the top dogs. We're seeing it with a lot of 2023 kids. We're seeing it with guys who are good prospects, but not necessarily great prospects. We're seeing a lot more talking to recruits and talking to prospects, talking to coaches. We're seeing Brian Kelly a lot more engaged now than he has been, which is a phenomenal sign. That could be the difference between Notre Dame having the 10th or 12th ranked recruiting class and Notre Dame having the 5th or 6th ranked recruiting class. Is Brian Kelly not just doing it now, but continuing that the whole year. If he can continue this through December, where he's being more involved, it's going to be great for Notre Dame, which is why I've been pushing for it to happen for so long. All right, let's see here. Dom Rorty asks, would the success of Blake Fisher and Rocco Spindler highlight that while O-line recruiting has been well ranked, it has lacked players with the ability to play at 310 plus? Dom, I just don't think that matters. I know that Notre Dame I've seen a lot of Notre Dame fans making an issue about this. I don't think that matters. Liam Eichenberg wasn't 310 pounds, and he was a consensus All-American last year. He was a first-team All-ACC player, a finalist for the Lombardi Award, and he was voted by the ACC coaches and defensive coordinators as the best blocker in the league. He was sub-300. Robert Hainsey was a tremendous player. He's going to be probably a third-round draft pick. He was less than 300 pounds last year. Jarrett Patterson was barely 300 pounds, and he was one of the 3 or 4 best centers in the country the last couple of years. I just don't think this whole notion of you have to be 310 plus. There are certain offensive schemes where you need a bigger body. Notre Dame does not have an offensive scheme where you necessarily need a bigger body. Tommy Kramer was the second biggest offensive lineman Notre Dame had last year. He was probably among the starters the least effective in that regards. So I just don't think that that's as big of an issue as people do. I think the bigger issue, however, is the fact that in the last couple of years, you have not gotten enough snaps for guys like Andrew Kristofic. You have not gotten them enough work. You've not coached them up enough to have them ready to play. You're moving them around too much. I think it speaks more to that than it does about the ability to play at 310 plus. I just don't think that matters. I know that a lot of people talk about that, but to me, it just doesn't matter. Would I like a guy to be 315 or 320 and be super athletic? Sure. But as we saw at Notre Dame this past year, I mean, they had arguably the best offensive line in the country until Jarrett Patterson got hurt. And they had what? 2 guys over 310 pounds. And if you go back and look at the grades, it was their 4th and 5th highest graded offensive linemen. And that'd be Aaron Banks and Tommy Kramer. So their 3 best offensive linemen this year when everybody was healthy were the guys that were under 310 pounds. So to me, that stuff just doesn't matter as much to me as it does to others. It doesn't. Now, at Alabama, it matters more because their system is predicated on having big, thick linemen that can move people. That's just the type of offensive run game system that they utilize. Notre Dame doesn't have that kind of system where it's a requirement. But if you have a 325-pound guy, like, for example, Deontay Brown, really good guard at Alabama, probably going to get drafted this year. He would not fit Notre Dame's offensive system. He just wouldn't. It's just a different system. You need a little bit more beef to do the power gap scheme type of stuff. And they'll still run inside zone, but they run more gap scheme stuff, which requires you have to have big moving interior players, like moving meaning they can come off and move people. Notre Dame doesn't have that same requirement with the system that they run. Dylan Hoffman asks, any idea or guess on Nwankpa's top 3 schools at the moment? Other than Ohio State, I couldn't tell you who his other top 2 or 3 schools are. Notre Dame's going to get a visit from him. He is going to be on campus from the 18th to the 20th. We'll find out. We talked about this earlier, Dylan. With a lot of these kids, especially like Nwankpa, we may know who the leader is, but who those next 2 or 3 schools is a lot of times going to be determined by who he gets. All right, here we go. Jason says there's a difference in playing at 300 pounds and being a natural 300-pounder. Spindler and Fisher carry the weight, unlike guys like Heinisch, Gibbons, and Hainsey. I get that, but so Gibbons, first of all, is a natural 300-pounder. He is a mover. Heinisch, I agree with you completely. Same thing with Myron Tungavaloa-Mosa. He was listed at 290, 285, 290 the last couple of years. He doesn't play that big. Mike Golick's another example. Mike Golick was over 300 pounds his final year at Notre Dame. He didn't play like a 300-pounder. Robert Hainsey, to me, was an outstanding offensive lineman for Notre Dame for the last 4 years. So yeah, he was under 300 pounds. It's not the requirement that people think it is, especially for Notre Dame. So here we go. All right, here we go. Gabe Weiss, do you think the one-time transfer rule will hurt Notre Dame more than most schools? In my opinion, they will have more guys leave than they can bring in due to academic restrictions, especially with transfers. Gabe, I'm gonna. So here's the thing: I'm very anti the new transfer rule, but not because of anything related to Notre Dame. I actually think this rule is going to help Notre Dame, and allow me to explain that in 2 regards. Here's why it helps Notre Dame. Number one, it doesn't necessarily. It'll open up a few more opportunities for transfers, and now keep in mind, like I said earlier, if a kid goes to another school and he takes a bunch of BS classes that some of these schools insist that kids take, not force, but insist that kids take, that kid's not coming to Notre Dame. But not every kid's like that. Some kids will say, look, I'm going to Georgia or Clemson or Alabama or Ohio State and pick a school that people don't think is a top academic school. And those kids care about academics and they'll stake those classes. Christian Wilkins, if he wanted to, could have transferred to Notre Dame at any minute and been accepted as a transfer. Trevor Lawrence could have transferred and been taken to Notre Dame if he so chose. So there are going to be some guys like that they'll be able to get. Now, the other situation is that, sorry, my wife was leaving, so wanted to wave goodbye, but warned you all that would happen. But so that it'll open up some opportunities for them to get players where it's not going to hurt Notre Dame as much as, look, this is something I've learned the last 4 or 5 years. There have been a lot of players that have thought about transferring, wanted to transfer, but decided not to, either their choice or parental pressure, because the thing was, you're going to stay and you're going to get your degree. What's going to continue happening in Notre Dame for the most part is what we've already seen, which is guys stay for 3 years, get their degrees, and leave, especially with Notre Dame bringing in so many now mid-year players, some early enrollees, because now those guys are on pace to graduate after their junior year. So the Jack Lamb situations, the Micah Jones type players, Jordan Genmark Heath type players, the guys that are early enrollees and graduate early that will leave after 3 years because they're not starting or they're not where they should be. Notre Dame's not going to lose a ton of underclassmen because part of the reason these guys came to Notre Dame was the degree. And that means guys are going to tend to be more patient to get that opportunity because of that. That's just what I've experienced from talking to different people. It says, yeah, my kid's frustrated. Well, why is he staying? Well, he wants to get that degree and he wants another shot. So the another shot is going to be given, and you're going to take advantage of it because you also have the influence of getting that degree, where at other schools, it's just kind of like, I don't like where I'm playing, so I'm just going to leave. Where at Notre Dame, it's like, yeah, I don't like where I'm playing, but I am 2 years in and I am a year away from graduating from Notre Dame. Let me stick it out for another year, and then I can transfer and play 2 years. So I think those are the things that are it's not going to hurt Notre Dame. I think if anything, it's going to be a benefit to Notre Dame. The other part of it is this. Notre Dame now has greater opportunity to tell some kids, hey, look, we love you. You can stay. You have a spot on our roster. They're not going to force kids out, but they're going to tell more kids maybe, but look, you're not going to play a lot for us. And we understand if you want to transfer, we'll help you find a place. That may happen a little bit more. Again, 1 or 2 guys a year. What that then does is that can then open up some opportunities in the recruiting classes for more players. Not so much to replace them with transfers, because I don't want Notre Dame to get into a situation where they're just bringing in transfers all the time. Recruit high school players, develop high school players, and then occasionally fill a need with a grad transfer like we've seen. Cody Riggs back in 2014. We saw with Nick McLeod last year. I'm so glad Nick McLeod came last year. But it's those little filling a role. It's not just this massive 5 or 6 starters. Football is still a game of continuity. It's still a game of 11 guys working in harmony towards one objective. And that's why you don't see Clemson and Alabama and Ohio State being guys that are teams that are just bringing in a bunch of transfers. They will get a kid here and there if it fits a role, if he fits a position, Ohio State with Justin Fields. But by and large, they are developing guys that they've recruited out of high school, and they're winning with those players. That's predominantly who it needs to be. That's where I think Notre Dame will be. But I do think this could then open up opportunities for a guy here, a guy there, for them to say, hey, look, it's best that, you're just not going to play and that kid's going to decide to leave, and then they can fill it with the high school recruit. All right. Shannon Hyduk says, last week you guys talked about rivalries and teams you love to hate. Ohio State comes to mind. I know they play in 22 and 23, but why do you think Notre Dame and Ohio State haven't had a better rivalry? Honestly, Shannon, it's because they haven't played a lot. I think that's a big part of it. Notre Dame and Ohio State, I'm actually going to pull this up while we're talking, but Notre Dame and Ohio State haven't played a ton. I mean, just in my lifetime, just since I started, really became a Notre Dame fan was in 1988, they've played 4 times, and 2 of those times were in bowl games. They've only played 6 times total. When you look at those teams play, they played in 1935 and 1936. They didn't play again from 36 until 1995, and then they played that back-to-back years, 95 and 96. And then they didn't play again for another 10 years in 2006 in a bowl game, and then it was another 10 years before they played again in another bowl game. So you can't have a rivalry with a program that you don't play. And I think that's a big part of it, and I just don't know if there's a lot for Notre Dame to have Ohio State on the schedule all the time. This was true when Ohio State wasn't dominant, and it's definitely true now that Ohio State is dominant. I do like the notion of having them, a home and home every decade. I'd be okay with, but I don't think it's a one that's going to happen a ton. We have a lot more questions. I'm going to try to get through these quickly. Gabe Weiss, do you think Estime will take a good amount of Sebo's reps? Seems like short yardage is both of their forte. Could he? Yes. Is it a foregone conclusion? No, it's not. He's going to have to earn that, because Sebo is not going to go down without a fight, and it's going to be tougher for one of those freshmen to do it. But Sebo is a good football player. He's done some good things. It'll be a battle. He's going to have to keep the job and win the job. But those guys will have a chance just because they're really good players. All right. Some love for Sebo. Sebo almost never gets a chance, but when he does, he comes through. Remember Duke? Yes, agree. Notre Dame 2164. I like Sebo a lot. Very hard runner. A lot of love for that. This is an interesting one. Gabe, what do you think is Brian Kelly's number one coaching attribute? That's a tough one. I think ultimately Brian Kelly has an understanding of what it takes to win. I do believe he has that. I don't think some of the decisions he makes in regards to bigger picture things have always worked as well. I think he's made some coaching mistakes, as all coaches do. I think the difference between Brian Kelly and Urban Meyer, for example, is Urban will quickly get out of his mistakes. He quickly realized that Everett Withers was not the answer. He quickly realized that that the Tom Beck, Ed Warner combination was not the answer. And he quickly made those moves and corrected them. And those moves ended up being benefits where it takes Brian Kelly almost to the point of failure before he'll make those changes. At least that's what he's done in the past. You look at Paul Longo, Brian Van Gorder, Autry Denson, guys like that. Charlie Molnar, was about the only one that I can remember him moving on from quickly. And he probably should have moved on even faster than he did. So, but I think he knows what it takes to win. He knows the kind of big picture over the course of the year, the kind of work. He understands that building a football team is a year-round thing. And when he puts people in place to implement his plan, I think it works. The problem is he hasn't always had the right people to implement his plan. But Brian Kelly understands what it takes to build a team. And partly that's kind of my frustration is because if he would make some of those better decisions and be more engaged in some of those areas, I think this team could take that final step, especially from a recruiting standpoint. And then again, an offensive philosophy standpoint, which is going back to who you used to be. And some more love for Sebo. He's a very likable player. All right, Dylan Hoffman, any word on the Jalen Sneed front? Do you think it's going to come down to Sneed or Cheeks? Which would I rather take? The word on Sneed is what I said at the time, which is, yes, it's great that he's going to visit. And I think Notre Dame's in a great position there, but I was not feeling like it was going to be a thing where he visited, he was going to commit. Jalen has said from day one, he wants to take visits. He's going to visit Oregon probably. He's going to try to get to Clemson. Do I think Notre Dame is in a good position? Absolutely. Did I ever think that he was on the verge of committing? Not publicly, maybe privately, but the reason he's not going public is because he wants to visit. And Notre Dame generally does not take commitments from players who are still going to visit other schools, which I think is smart. So, yeah, I would say that is where they are with Jalen Sneed. And now I'm curious to see when they can get that official visit set up and get him on campus again. But I like where they're at. Could it come down to Cheeks or Sneed? Potentially. It depends on what happens to Junior Tuihalamaka. If they take Junior Tuihalamaka, then yeah, it's going to come down to one of those two guys because I don't think they're going to take 5 guys. There's a chance that if Tuihalamaka ends up going to Texas, which I think is Notre Dame's toughest competition right now, then there's a scenario in which you could take Sneed and Cheeks. I believe that you could. So it may not end up coming down to that. But if I can only have one of those two, I'd take Jalen Sneed. I think he's a higher ceiling player. I just think he's more dynamic, a little bit more versatile, and just a better football player. But Sebastian Cheeks is also a really good football player. Jalen Sneed to me is a top 100 recruit. Sebastian Cheeks is a top 150 recruit. That's the difference. So again, both really good football players. If you get either one of them, it's a big pickup. But if I could only take one, I would take Jalen Sneed. All right. Gabe asks, is it true that Notre Dame takes a special coach at the helm? Not everyone can do it. Who do you think are other coaches that would fit the position at Notre Dame? We'll get into that another time. I've talked a little bit about this, the part about who would fit. I've mentioned some guys I like, but there's still some emerging coaches that I need to see what they do over the next couple of years. It takes a special coach to win at Notre Dame. Notre Dame, in my opinion, is the hardest place to win at if you don't have a special coach. I do think it's harder to win at Notre Dame. I don't think it's too hard to win at Notre Dame. I don't think it's so hard that you can't win at Notre Dame. That's the difference. But you can't just hire anybody, because what I think happens is if you're just a good coach, you can win at Bama because you can recruit well enough. There's other things that go into recruiting that help you out. The LSU, you don't have to be a great coach to win there. I don't think Les Miles is a great coach. I think he's above average coach, but he won a lot at LSU because that's such a phenomenal state, and there's other things that factor into it. If you're just an okay coach, you're going to fail at Notre Dame because it's a hard place to win for many reasons, and some of it don't have anything to do with football. So I just, we'll see what happens. John A1 says Tariq Bracy has had a couple INTs in the practice clips. How do coaches gauge where he is mentally? I think it's just showing up every day. It's reading his body language. It's when he gets beat. Does he come back the next play? Or when he gets beat, does that kind of then set up he gets beat on the next rep, the next rep, the next rep? You look at his body language. When he gets beat, is he jumping up and pissed off and smacking his hands because he's mad that he got beat? Or does he put his head down? Does he kind of walk back and, not want to take a rep? Is he less apt to jump in the next time against a guy that beat him the last time and won him back? I mean, I want to see a cornerback that gets beat, ticked off. I want to see him run back, and I want to see the next time that guy's out there in any situation say, Coach, let me get this rep. Let me get this rep. Let me get back at him. Those are the things that kind of tell you that a guy is mentally prepared to handle playing corner, which means you're going to get beat. Julian Love was an All-American. He got beat sometimes. Shane Walton was an All-American. He got beat sometimes. Todd Light was an All-American and a top 10 NFL draft pick. He got beat sometimes. It shouldn't happen often, but then how do you respond to it? And the problem for Tariq is he didn't respond to it well. It would affect his technique. He would overplay receivers because he was afraid to get beat, so he wouldn't find the ball. It just everything that makes him such a good player would be out the window, and that kind of thing can happen. All right, let's see. Yeah, we talked a little bit about this earlier. That was a big play. But to your point, seems like it was a pretty nice heads up play. Exactly. That's the instinct part that we're seeing from Rocco Spindler that to me is really impressive. Brandon asks about, do you see Devin Moore as a corner or a safety? There's a pick in by Tom Loy for Notre Dame to land him. Yeah, we talked about Tom having that pick in earlier. As you guys know, we don't do crystal balls and future casts and all that other stuff here, but I'm hearing the same things Tom is hearing. And if Tom is, I think maybe even hearing a little bit more because he's putting in the crystal ball, we'll see how that goes. He's a safety for me. He's a safety that can cover. He's not a corner. He's a safety that can cover for me. Here we go. So Dylan asks, so Tosh isn't underperforming at spring ball this far. I don't hear a ton about it. I mean, you're not going to hear a ton about it. We watch these clips. It's 3 minutes worth of clips. If somebody's you're going to see him getting beat. Nobody should be making strong opinions about what they're seeing from these 3-minute clips on anybody, much less offensive linemen. So look, he's still getting a lot of first team reps. And if he wasn't at least showing them something, he would not still be getting a bunch of first team reps. All right. I don't see it. I mean, Brandon, you say this, he's saying the recruitment corner. That's not what I've been told. I've been told they like him at safety, but they like him as a guy that can cover. That's the thing. I'd be a little surprised if they actually bring him in as a corner. All right. I'll ask about that. But the last time I asked about it, I was told he was a safety. All right. Here we go. Okay. I don't know. I don't know. I mean, I don't think they're in a situation where they could get both of those guys, but if they do, that'd be great. Okay. Searcher Green asks, any idea where we stand with Jake Taylor? That is the offensive lineman from Las Vegas, Bishop Gorman. I think they're in a good place there. I think Oklahoma's still the leader right now, but I think it's a situation where that is a kid, as much as anybody in the class, that when he gets to Notre Dame, a visit could be a game changer for him. And Mike Elson talked about this. Visiting Notre Dame is so important. Very, very important. They need guys to be able to be on campus and see Notre Dame. And Jake Taylor, to me, is a kid that could see his recruitment change more than anybody else in regards to getting on campus. Jason asks, what incoming recruits do you wish were on campus for this spring? I'll go with Chance Tucker and JoJo Johnson. Makes sense. For me, it's Prince Colley and Deion Colsey are the two for me. The reason I say that is I think if Prince was on campus early, he'd have a shot to be in the rotation at Rover immediately. I think when Jack Kaiser and Isaiah Pryor getting a full spring, they may have more distance from him. But if he was on campus now, there would be no distance, at least not with Isaiah Pryor. I think Kaiser would still start, but I think it'd be very hard to keep Prince Colley off the field if he were on campus right now. Same with Deion Colsey. They don't really have a big guy at receiver right now. With Kevin Austin banged up, they don't really have that big one-on-one guy. And I like at least one of those guys, and I'd like to see Deion kind of get that chance. It's going to be harder for him to do that in the fall. If he had the 15 extra reps, I could see a situation where he could have maybe done that. Josh Lake asks, more impact short-term, Styles or Fisher? Fisher, because I think Fisher's going to have a chance to start. I think it's going to be a little harder for Lorenzo to make the kind of impact I think a potential starter or co-starter could make it at offensive tackle. The exception would be is if Lorenzo can win a return job in the punt return game. But, that would also require Notre Dame to allow him to return punts more frequently. Here's an interesting one. Notre Dame 2164. After this year, where do you think Kyle Hamilton will rank all time as a Notre Dame defensive player? I mean, I think right now you're trying to see if where is he going to be in regards to the best safety of the Brian Kelly era. Harrison Smith is that guy right now. Kyle has a chance to be that, but we need to see him. We need to see him have it. He's had one really good year, really good freshman year for a freshman, real strong sophomore year, but there's still a lot he's got to do. He's still a lot of improvement he's got to make, and I want to see him actually do it before we stack him up. I mean, right now, his resume doesn't touch guys like Jalen Smith, guys like even Stephon Tuitt, guys like Manti Te'o, Harrison Smith. So, right now, he's not even a top 5 defensive player in the Brian Kelly era, in my opinion. Now, could he be after next year? Sure, which is your question was after this year. But I have a hard time projecting that. I want to see him do it first, and then we can talk about it. But could he have a chance at being one of the 5 best defensive players of the Brian Kelly era? Absolutely. Absolutely, when it's all said and done. Because who would your 5 be right now? And you got to put Manti in that conversation, right? You got to put Julian Love in that conversation. You got to put Jalen Smith in that conversation. You got to put Stephon Tuitt in that conversation. Harrison Smith's in that conversation, right? With what Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah has done the last 2 years, he's got to be in that conversation, I believe. So, to me, all those guys right now would rank ahead of Kyle Hamilton. He's going to have a pretty special junior year to be in that mix, and he's going to have a chance to do it. He could absolutely thrust himself into that conversation. All right. Tool Worker says, hit the like button. Please do. We appreciate that. Searcher Green asks, what is your opinion of Kevin Winston as a safety recruit? So he is an interesting kid. He's kind of on my list of guys that I just don't have a strong opinion on yet because we just don't have junior film. He's he's from the DC area, very good downhill player. I just don't have enough film of him, and he's a sophomore to feel as good about him as some guys who I've seen play more. And that's why I just don't talk a ton about him. Yeah. So Thomas Leonard, is Vince a gym teacher? That's one of the things he does. Yes, he is a teacher at the local high school. All right. He's also the head baseball coach for his team. Michael Scheller asks, all right, what's the latest with 2022 linebacker recruiting? Obviously limited spots, but where's Notre Dame currently with Snead, Cheeks, and Junior? Thanks, Brian and Vince. We talked a little bit about Snead earlier. Cheeks, that remains a mystery for me because he always says great things about Notre Dame. Whenever we interview him, you get the impression like, yeah, Notre Dame's the school to beat, but then he hasn't pulled the trigger. Now the question is he not able to pull the trigger, or is he not willing to pull the trigger? And I don't think we have an answer to that yet. At least I don't. So I'll admit that I don't know the answer to that one. Junior Tuilalamaka, I think part of the reason we're not hearing as much about him and Cheeks is they're playing their junior years right now. And I think some people have to understand that they're not going to be making visits right now because they're playing their season. For me, Michael, we won't really know where things stand with those guys until they get on campus. And I think with Junior, I think Notre Dame is in a great place with him. I think Notre Dame is his leader, but they got to get him on campus. So that's going to be the thing. Get him on campus, and then we'll have a conversation. Jordan says, you're my favorite Notre Dame analyst, by the way. I love that you aren't wishy-washy in your takes like the rest. I appreciate that, Jordan. My commitment to y'all will always be, look, I used to be a guy that tried to be more positive, and I get criticized for it. And, then when I'm critical, I get criticized for it. And what I realized is no matter what take you have, if you're a homer, you're going to get criticized by some people. If you're a constantly negative person, you're going to get criticized by some people. So what I decided to do is just give your honest take. And if it's critical, go with it. And at the end of the day, I can put my head on the pillow and know that I was honest with y'all. I gave you my honest assessment, whether I'm right or wrong. And my job is to not make Brian Kelly happy or make Tommy Reese happy or to make Jeff Quinn like me and respond to my texts or whatever. My job is to give you all my honest opinion. And if I do that, I can live with it. And I'm happy with what I do. And I enjoy what I do. And that's the thing is if I can be honest and give my honest assessment, I enjoy that. I like doing that. And I think people appreciate that. And that's what I'm going to be. And it's not trying to be different from another site or they've established the homer market. So I'm going to be this. That's not it. I'm just going to be honest, and people can like it or they cannot like it. And that's basically how it's going to be. Preston, we talked about Devin Moore already. So if you could kind of go back and ask that one. We also talked about Kevin Winston. My understanding is he's a safety prospect, but we'll see about that one. Let's see here. All right. Dylan asks, do you think the success of Notre Dame, Clemson, Oregon will play into effect with the decision of Cyrus Moss? One of his comments about making a decision was he wants to see how the 2021 plays out. Well, if he's saying that, then yes, it's gonna factor into it. But normally when kids say that, there's more to it than just winning and losing. There's, okay, for Notre Dame, it's, okay, how does Coach Freeman's off defense look? If this school has a coach that, does Brent Venables get a head coaching job? Does the defensive coordinator at, Tim DeRuyter, I believe, is the defensive coordinator at Oregon, does he get a head coaching job? What's his system going to look like this year? Who leaves? So if Kayvon Thibodeau comes back for next year, maybe Cyrus doesn't want to go there and sit behind him for a year. I'm not saying that's true. I'm just making an example of how the year plays out. It's not just winning and losing. Okay, Notre Dame had the best record of all of them. I'm going there. That's not how it works. It's a lot of different factors. That's part of it, but that's not a major factor. Devin and Ashley says, any news on who is going to start at wide receiver? No, it's way too early for that. And honestly, from what I'm told and what I'm hearing, who starts at receiver is not going to be as important. It's going to be looking at who is in the game when it's on the line. There, from what I'm told, we'll see, is it's going to be about a deeper rotation than we've seen, which I'm happy about. Now, in the past, Devin, I mean, this is one of those things where in the past, yeah, who started mattered because the starters would dominate the reps. I don't think that's going to happen as much this year. Who will start at quarterback? I don't have the answer. I think it's going to be Jack Cohn, but I think Drew Pine's making this a legitimately hard decision. We'll kind of see how this goes. All right. DBZ, can Jordan Johnson be the dude at wide receiver this year? Can he? Yes. Will he get that opportunity? Will he take advantage of that opportunity if it comes? I don't know. We'll have to see that. I haven't seen enough. I mean, I haven't seen anything from him in the clips. He's very, very rarely put in the clips. That doesn't mean anything. It just means we haven't seen enough of him, and I haven't really heard a whole lot about him from people I've talked to. Again, doesn't mean he's not playing well. Just means I haven't heard a lot about him. I'll do some digging over the next couple days, try to see if I can get a better idea of that. We'll find out. All right. Steven also kind of asked a similar question. You always have the best videos on Notre Dame football. Who do you feel will start at quarterback, and how do you see this the ND versus SC game going? Well, this matters to you, Steven, because you're out in LA, but we just talked about who's going to start at quarterback. I still think it's going to be Jack Cohn. The ND SC game is going to be interesting. So it's going to be back at Notre Dame this year. I think SC is a talented team at certain spots. I think their skill is going to be, yes, they lost some Tyler Vaughns. They lost Amon-Ra St. Brown. But they got Drake London coming back. They've got some other young receivers coming back. Thank you, Mark. Appreciate you very, very much. We will definitely do that. I appreciate the chat. I think for me, the USC game is going to be one of, I think USC is going to be really good this year, but I could see this game playing out a lot like the 2017 game. Not from a 49-14 standpoint, Stephen, because I don't think it'll be that big of a blowout, but Notre Dame just so absolutely dominated the trenches in 2017 that it negated the skill. I mean, Sam Darnold was the quarterback for that team. They had Ronald Jones at running back. That team was loaded with skill players, but it didn't matter because they dominated the line of scrimmage. USC lost their best offensive lineman, Elijah Vera Tucker. Their offensive line wasn't that great to begin with. And I know they get rid of the ball quickly and those kind of things, but if you can't protect your quarterback, then I'm just going to come up and press and take away your quick stuff and force your quarterback to hold the ball longer, and we're going to eat you up. And then when we mix up our coverages enough defensively, we're going to force your quarterback into some mistakes trying to get rid of the ball quickly. So I just think Notre Dame is just going to be able to dominate the trenches, dominate the line of scrimmage, especially with their defense. That I think that's going to play a big role in why I think Notre Dame should win that game and probably win it somewhat convincingly. All right. CS, Coach, what do you think of the safety board after Nwankpa? Who do you think are gap closers and recruits you want? I'm going to have a big board coming out next week at safety, but I don't know if there's necessarily any gap closers there. But as far as guys that can be part of a really good safety tandem, that can be part of an overall defense that closes the gap, there's several on the list. Jake Pope, we talked about earlier. I think he's on that conversation. Devin Moore's in that conversation. He's a guy that I think could give you a really good safety group. And even if they are recruiting him at corner, my bet would be they're recruiting him at corner to eventually move him to either safety or the nickel spot. That third corner or third safety look would be a really good one for him. I could see him doing that, and as if not being a back end safety, but I don't see Devin Moore being an outside corner at the next level. I think he could play it, but not play it to the level that he could play safety or that nickel spot. I could see that. Sherrod Coville is a guy that I really like at safety. He could be part of a really good safety group. Jaden Mangum's an interesting one because I really like him at safety, but my big fear with him is I don't know if he wants to play safety. And he says he'd play whatever he wants, but every camp I've seen him at, and we saw him recently at every camp I've seen him with highlights, he plays receiver. And you can say, well, that's what they want me to play. Well, if you wanted to play safety and you said, hey, I want to play safety this camp, they'd let you play safety. We saw some kids at the Columbus camp, for example, that play both ways. And so they would jump in at receiver or jump in at DB and take reps. He didn't do that. He just took receiver reps. So I just don't know. I don't know if he's kind of that guy. Here's an interesting comment. I was really excited about both Wimbush. Was that Notre Dame recruited the wrong guys or they screwed up their development? Deshaun Kaiser's the only 4-star we've seen work out. He was a lower end 4-star. And I don't even know if we could even say that worked out because his last year as Notre Dame, he's a starter of a 4-8 football team. And his off the field shenanigans and lack of leadership was a big part of that. To me, I mean, if you want to say a 4-star that worked out, I mean, Everett Golson worked out more than Deshaun Kaiser did, and he was a 4-star recruit as well. For me, honestly, Jordan, I think it's a development problem. And if you go look, Brandon Wimbush is the ultimate example of that. If you go back and watch Brandon as a senior in high school and watch his throwing motion, his accuracy, how comfortable he was in a pocket, and then you go watch Brandon in late 2017 and 2018, or even when he was rolling in 2017, this is a different guy. And I think 2 years under Mike Stanford hurt him. I don't think much of Mike Stanford as a quarterback's coach. I'm sorry. I know that's an unpopular opinion, but I don't. Look at what he did at Utah State. Jordan Love went from being a top 10 caliber pick to borderline first-round pick in 1 year of work on Mike Stanford. Look what he did in 1 year at Tanner Morgan at Minnesota. Minnesota had a really good offense the year before. And you come back this year, Tanner Morgan's not nearly the quarterback he was the year before. So either it's just a coincidence that quarterbacks keep getting worse when he coaches them, or he's not a good quarterbacks coach. And I just don't think he's a good quarterbacks coach. Why does Indy always recruit so few QBs? Just more in Manning seems ridiculous. There seems to be some great 2023 QBs. Who would you like to see Indy offer and go after? So a couple things. Number one, big part of it is they've just identified guys early and they get them. They got Phil Jakovic early. They got Tyler Buckner early. They got Drew Pine really early. So when you get your guy, you don't need to offer more players. There have been other years we've seen them offer more. 2019 class, some offer more. They got Cade McNamara early and then offered other players and had a little bit of a deeper board before finally getting Brendan Clark. So I think that's part of it. But as far as Moore and Manning, those are the only two guys they've publicly offered, but those aren't the only two quarterbacks they're recruiting. Brian Smith did an interview with Ricky Collins, who's a quarterback from Louisiana, and Notre Dame has offered him. There's a kid from out in California whose name I cannot pronounce, who Notre Dame is recruiting. There's a quarterback from named, I think it's Cole. I forget his last. It's like Tashner or something like that. I have to go look it up. But I'd love to see them recruit him. But they're recruiting more than two corners or quarterbacks in the 2023 class. So there's just only two that they've offered so far. So don't let that they've only offered two sophomores convince you that they're only recruiting two, Jordan. They're actually recruiting. And Ricky Collins, when he talked to the guys that I had down at the Atlanta, I think it was the Atlanta camp where he was at, he praised Tommy Rees. He already has a good relationship with Tommy Rees. So even though he doesn't have an offer, that just tells you there's some other things they got to figure out first before offering him. But they're recruiting him, and they've had an impactful early recruitment of him. I believe he's from Louisiana, so check his film out. But there are other quarterbacks they're recruiting. They just haven't offered yet. So D-Rock, yes, 120 in the chat, only 3 likes. Hit that like button, folks. We appreciate that. All right, here we go. Chief Brody, is it possible that these 10-2, 11-2 seasons are all part of the BK plan, stepping stones and trying to gradually raise the program to the consistent title challenger rather than meteoric like LSU? Absolutely. And look, LSU didn't have a meteoric rise. I mean, they had a meteoric rise on offense. But let's not forget the year before, that they won the title, they went 10-3 and finished in the top 10. They beat UCF in a bowl game. The year before that, they were 9-4. They beat Notre Dame. They're 10-3. I mean, LSU didn't come out of nowhere. They had a couple down years, but LSU had plenty of good years in between that. I mean, 2011, 2012, they were a borderline national title team. So, look, Brian Kelly is doing it the right way. I'm always a believer that you build for sustainability. You don't just win that one title and then you lose everybody and you stink the next year like LSU did this past year, which is a weird situation. What you do is you build sustainability and then you helpfully get over that hump. Clemson did that a little bit. Clemson had about 3 good years of building before, they had that horrible 2011 ending to their season against West Virginia. But before then, I mean, they were starting to close. I mean, the game that they lost to West Virginia where they got embarrassed in the bowl game, it was still the Orange Bowl. I mean, they were still a 10-win team and went 10-4 that year. So in 2011, they went 10-4. The next year they went in 2012, they went 11-2. Then beat LSU in a bowl game. The next year they went 11-2, beat Ohio State in a bowl game. Had a little bit of a step back the next year, went 10-3, got embarrassed by Georgia, lost on the road to Georgia Tech, lost to Florida State, and then Deshaun Watson got hurt. But then they went smacked Oklahoma in the bowl game. So they had a 4-year buildup. To your point, Jordan, or Chief Brody, they had that buildup. And then when you have the slower build, it can lead to greater sustainability. So I don't think that it's part of Brian Kelly's plan in that, we're going to do this and then by year 5, we're going to win it. It's about creating a stable program. And then when you have that stable program, it leads to greater success on the recruiting trail, which then allows you to take that next step, if that makes sense. So is it part of his plan? Yes. I don't think I'm advocating for Notre Dame having some meteoric rise out of nowhere. It's about you're close, you're already close, and now it's about making the necessary changes to get over the hump, to your point. So I do think it was about getting Notre Dame where it needs to be, but I don't think it was a gradual thing. I mean, look, what I would say is prior to 2017, Notre Dame underachieved a lot. If you go back and look at the games they lost. And let's just go through it. So, Notre Dame went 8-5 in his first year in 2010, and they lost to Tulsa. Shouldn't happen. They lost to Navy that year. Shouldn't happen. They blow a game, at Michigan State they should have won. They lose to Michigan at home, a game that they should not have lost. I mean, there were a lot of games that they were building their program, but that was to me I'll give them a pass, but you shouldn't go 8-5. The next year, they went 8-5 again with guys like Zach Martin, Tyler Eifert, Michael Floyd, Harrison Smith on the team. Why? They lost to South Florida that year. South Florida went 5-7 that year. There's no excuse for that. They blow a 24-7 fourth quarter lead against Michigan. They choke a game away against Florida State they shouldn't have lost. South Carolina whooped them. That's not a game they should have lost. So underachieving seasons. 2013, they go 9-4. And they lost a game to Pitt. They blew a lead at Pitt. They lost to Stanford in a game they should have won. You win one of those games, you're a 10-win team. 2014, they lost at home to Northwestern. They lost at home to Louisville. They just choked against Arizona State. So my point is, I think what's happened now is he's just made some better hires, and they've made some changes. But I think it's more about the hires. Instead of keeping Paul Longo, you hire Matt Bayless. Instead of hiring Brian Van Gorder, you go out and you get Mike Elko and then Clark Lee and now Marcus Freeman. I think that's been a big part of it. Offensively, it's about, you get Harry Hiestand. That changes things. And then, Mike Denbrock did a great job. And then Chip Long takes it to the next level. But they're not where they need to be yet. You need to find the guy on offense, or at least a philosophy on offense that'll allow you to make the jump. Because let's not forget, Brian Kelly's made two big philosophical changes at Notre Dame. You begin with the 3-4, and then he makes the move to a 4-down defense under Van Gorder. That was a big philosophy shift. And then there was another pretty big philosophy shift from Van Gorder to Mike Elko defense. And so he's done those things. Now it's time to do that on offense. All right. Okay. John Zabrowski asks, when you listen to Brian Kelly's press conferences, do you get the sense that that Coach Kelly's answers about quarterback and O-line are a result of his insistence on following the process he harps on? Yeah, I mean, Brian Kelly is a political animal, and I don't mean that as an insulting manner. he has a plan in place. And this is back to the earlier question of his greatest asset is he knows what he's trying to accomplish big picture with his program. And everything in his answers is going to be geared towards that. I think an example is the question I asked him about. I asked him a question about, building your identity or something along those lines. And he completely changed the direction and answered it a different way because he had a point he wanted to get out. And that was the closest question that he had to getting that point out. He's always been very good about that. So yes, I think it's very much about the process, and I'm comfortable with the process. I just think sometimes get to the point where you got to start settling in on some decisions at wide, especially about wide receiver, in regards to settling in, and offensive line, settling in, get guys in position where they get comfortable, and go from there. All right. Bryce asks, will you guys be at the spring game doing coverage, or do I have to watch it on Peacock? We'll be at the spring game doing coverage, but we won't be able to play it because we don't have rights to it. You'll have to watch it on Peacock. I'm trying to find out. I believe that you don't have to have Peacock paid for to watch it. I think, as what somebody told me, I'm going to have to work on that one. So we'll have to see about that. All right. So you have any more questions? All right. Trey Guy, thanks so much for the show. It's really great. Thank you, Trey, for listening. He also has a question. What are the holes as we are more than halfway through spring on offense and defense? I think the holes are you're still trying to figure out who's going to play where on the offensive line. I think that's obviously right now. If you had to go play a game on Saturday right now, you would not feel comfortable at where you're on the offensive line. And defensively, it's about the corner position. Still trying to settle in on who's going to be your cornerbacks. But I think I'd feel a lot more comfortable with the defense being able to play well on Saturday. If Notre Dame had a real game on Saturday, I'd feel a lot better about the defense, and I'd feel good about the skill players. And whoever they decided to start at quarterback, I'd feel comfortable with. I really am. I think Jack Cohn's going to win the job. I think Jack Cohn probably has the highest ceiling for 2021. But if Drew Pine beats him out, cool. I hope every Notre Dame has an opinion. I know every Notre Dame fan, you pick the guys you want. I like this guy more, that guy more. And I'm not talking about you, Trey, just in general. But honestly, whoever starts a quarterback this year is going to win the job and is going to give them the best chance to win and has the talent to win. So if it's Jack Cohn, get behind him because he's good enough to do it. If it's Drew Pine, it means he beat out a pretty good quarterback who took a team to a Big Ten title game and took a team to a Rose Bowl. Get behind him because I think they're both very, very talented players and could get there. Jay Wolf, this is an interesting one. So Michael Mayer eventually triumphs over Ken McAfee, Tyler Eifert to take the all-time tight end great throne. Again, it's way too early for that. Does he have the talent to do that? Sure. But let's let him have a sophomore year before we put him into that. But yes, he has the absolute talent to be that kind of player. Where you're talking about, is he one of the best to ever do it? Sure. He's already had the best freshman season, but it's in a different era. Is it possible he could match the third place Heisman finish that Ken McAfee produced? No, I don't. And that has nothing to do with him. It's the Heisman Trophy is way different now. It is basically the best quarterback or running back / receiver on one of the best teams. That's what it's come down to. And it's for the most part a quarterback award now. I don't care how good you are at tight end. Look, if he's having a great year at tight end, then, who's going to be the guy that gets all the hype for the Heisman? It's going to be whoever the quarterback is at Notre Dame. If Notre Dame's good enough to where a tight end should get that kind of conversation, then it's going to go to the quarterback. That's just the nature of it, unfortunately. Jonathan, love your content at Irish Breakdown. Always appreciate your perspective. Did we make a mistake in not landing Joe Moorhead as our offensive coordinator? So, two-part answer to this, and the answer is yes. For 2020, yes, they made a mistake. In my opinion, this team would have been better in 2020 with Joe Moorhead as the offensive coordinator. I think Tommy Rees would have benefited greatly from working under Joe Moorhead as an offensive coordinator. Having said that, I don't think it'll be a mistake for a whole lot longer if Brian Kelly allows Tommy Rees to kind of take more control of the offense. I think that my issue with that hire was in 2020 and possibly 2021, it's going to hurt the program. But I also felt like if you brought Joe Moorhead in, Joe Moorhead wasn't going to be here very long. If he has 2 great years and he's the coordinator that we think he is, then he's going to be gone in a couple of years to be a head coach again, right? I think we can all agree on that. And that's when Tommy Rees would have gladly stepped in at the age of 30, 31, and I would have said, great hire. I like it. He just needed more seasoning. Well, now that seasoning is happening kind of under the gun as the offensive coordinator, and that's going to benefit him as he gets into be a 30, 31, 32-year-old guy. And so in those instances, Jonathan, yes, I think it's going to benefit him down the road. It was a mistake not to hire him immediately, but I don't think it's going to be a long-term mistake because I don't view this as like a Brian Van Gorder hire. I think Tommy Rees is going to be a really, really good coordinator. It just he wasn't ready to be that yet. But maybe this year we start to see him take those steps, and then by 2022 you start saying, hey, you know what? This is going to really benefit this team. And that's when it could be a benefit that they didn't have him. So I think that then you could say, okay, taking your lumps in 2021 benefited Notre Dame because now he's a seasoned guy as you get into that 22 and 23 schedule. Whereas if Joe Moorhead came and Tommy Rees replaced him after 2 years, now all of a sudden its first year is 2022 when you're playing Ohio State and Clemson. I don't know if that would have been such a great thing. John A1, Irish Breakdown is the best insider for Notre Dame football by far. Appreciate that. Thank you, and keep up the excellent content. You know for a fact, John, that we will definitely continue to do that. We will definitely continue keeping up our content. Let's see here. Okay. A lot of great questions this week, y'all. I really appreciate that. And the people that are still sticking with it, you are awesome. You are certainly troopers. Robert asks, would you rather have more noon or 1 p.m. games instead of 3:30 and night games? I kind of like the 3:30 and the night games for me because, number one, selfishly, the 3:30 and night games allow me to spend some time with my wife in the morning. I get to make her breakfast, and we get to spend a little time before I go to the stadium. And in previous years before 2020 and the whole limiting access and all that, we would go to games together. She does photography. She would do photography for our games when I was at Blue and Gold Illustrated. She had, I think, like 4 or 5 cover photos for our magazine. So, but, it's work time then. And so selfishly, I kind of like it. Plus, the 3:30 night games allows me to watch a lot more football. Whereas if they played at noon or 1, then the only games I can really watch are the night games where – and even then, sometimes I can't. If it's a road game, I don't get to watch any football that day because we have the game, I do all my work, and then I'm heading back to the hotel to write and get ready to fly back home. So I kind of like the 3:30 in the night games personally, but I know a lot of people like to play early, especially people in the Midwest. They're used to the Big Ten games being in there too. So Rob Wicks, who could be the number 1 receiver for the Irish? I think they have a lot of candidates. Kevin Austin has the talent to be that. Well, I don't know if he's going to do it or not. Jordan Johnson does. I think Avery Davis does in a different way, maybe not from a 90-catch volume standpoint, but as far as the go-to guy in clutch moments, absolutely. I think Xavier Watts has that kind of talent. I think guys like Braden Lindsey and Lawrence Keys are more complementary players, but impactful complementary players. So not number ones, but key parts of a component. All right here. Do you think that Justin Hilliard recruitment kind of hurt BK's recruiting pride, so to say? A possible reason that he hasn't been such an active recruiter since. I don't think he was a very active recruiter before that, Thomas, and I don't think losing Justin Hilliard hurt his pride. It's a loss. They've had other losses. I just think he puts a priority on other things for him personally on what to do. I think that's kind of part of it. Connor Patton, will Notre Dame be able to stay out of politics this year? Notre Dame football be able to stay out of politics this year? No, I don't think so. Nope, I don't think they will. I hope so, because I hope there's no real big political things to have to deal with. And, so hopefully that's the case. But no, I think if things happen, they will get involved. It's too easy to get involved from a social media standpoint to do it. And I just think that they will. All right. Jordan asks, is Notre Dame running RPOs this spring? Yes. What do you think triggered the change? Getting whooped by Alabama and your offense getting completely dominated in games against Clemson and Alabama. That's one thing Coach has done. When he gets embarrassed, he's more often than not, he's made changes. And he was able to make excuses in 2018. A lot of new players in the lineup. They lost a lot from the year before. Missed some opportunities. Maybe he didn't think they had enough playmakers, whatever. There's no excuse in what we saw this year and what happened. And now that's 3 butt whoopings. I mean, look, Notre Dame's last 3 losses were all blowouts. You go back to Michigan in 2019. You go back to the Clemson game, the ACC title game, and then the Alabama game. They're all blowouts. They were games Notre Dame wasn't really competitive. In each instance, the offense was bad. Now, the defense was bad. Everybody was bad against Michigan. But the defense didn't play bad against Clemson and Alabama in those losses. The offense did. And I think he understands that it's time to get that part of the ball going. All right. Jordan Schreiber, did Chip Long and Tommy Rees have a good relationship? Do you think Rees picked up on Long's elite recruiting habits? From everything I've heard, yes, they had not only had a good relationship, but still have a good relationship. And I do think Tommy Rees learned some things from him, and I think they worked well together. So yes, I think you're onto something there, Jordan. Brandon, thank you for the all that are giving these super chat donations. Appreciate it so much. This is awesome. This is the kind of stuff that helps us really grow this thing. Thanks for going through these questions, indulging us. Love it. Glad you branched out on your own. You're always my favorite person in the biz to listen to. Look, Brandon, I know my personality. I know my strengths as a person. I know my weaknesses, and I also know what I'm not going to change. And what I'm not going to change is I'm going to have very strong opinions about things. And when I think something can be done a certain way, and I'm going to say it. And that's not just about Notre Dame. That's also about how businesses should be run. And I appreciate the opportunities that Mike Frank gave me at Irish Sports Daily, back Irish Eyes. I appreciate the opportunity that Stu Coleman gave me at Blue and Gold Illustrated, and both of them helped me to grow and develop in different ways. But I was ready to do my own thing, and I was ready to be my own boss and to say, hey, if you think these things can work, then go try it. I didn't anticipate a few months afterwards a pandemic hitting, but it's been a good experience for me, and I've enjoyed it, and I'm so glad. I mean, we've grown. Every single month has been significantly better than what it was a year ago, and that kind of growth has been a lot of fun to see it happen organically, to grow the YouTube channel. I mean, it's over 100 people in this chat the whole time. I thought maybe 10 people would show up. So it's been a lot of fun. Appreciate you all being a part of it. But the reality is I could write what I want to write and say what I want to say. But if y'all aren't part of the community, y'all aren't building it, y'all aren't being there with us, it doesn't matter. I'm a guy that has strong opinions that nobody listens to. It's you guys and you gals that make this really fun, because otherwise I'm just talking to myself, and that wouldn't be that much fun. All right, what are you hearing about the battle at Will? Linebacker, is Maris Lufau leading right now? I've heard Shane Simon's leading right now, and Maris is playing a lot and doing well, but I've heard Shane Simon is having a very, very good spring so far. Jonathan asks, is the future Buckner or Pine? What's your way too early take? I don't know. I mean, look, Tyler Buckner has the highest ceiling of any quarterback on the roster. And even if he doesn't become the passer I think he could be because of the changes he's made mechanically, he's still a dynamic athlete that can make a lot of, and we're seeing it in the highlights where he'll tuck and run and make big plays. He is a dynamic two-way player. He has the highest ceiling, but he's going to have to beat out Drew Pine, and that's not going to be easy. And some people weren't as high on Pine as I think they should have been. Drew Pine's a darn good football player. He's smart. He's accurate. He can make plays as well with his arm. And he's mobile enough where he can move the chains on a 3rd and 5 kind of thing. But I still say Tyler Buckner has the highest ceiling. But to be the future, it's not just about talent. You got to win that job. And he's still a ways away from that. Look, this is why I wrote, before spring started, I wrote an article saying Tyler Buckner has a tremendous talent, but patience is needed. You can look it up. Type in Tyler Buckner, patience, and then Irish Breakdown or Brian Driscoll, and you're going to see that article come up, because this is a kid that's played 1 year of football in the last 3 years. He's got a lot to learn, and we just need to have some patience with us. So, all right, some other questions here. I'm going to try to get through some of these. All right, Christopher. Yes, I know a lot of your comments and questions we haven't really got to because I'm trying to get into that kind of stuff. We'll see what CJ Williams. But this one, it's great that ND insiders at Irish Breakdown have regular Q&A sessions with fans hungry for info like me. We're going to keep doing it. This is fun for me. Like, we're talking 2.5 hours now. It's insane. 2.5 hours, and I still got a lot of questions to get to. But I love it. I enjoy it. This is a lot of fun because, as Vince and I have said, we're Notre Dame fans too, right? I'm always going to be objective and honest and tell it like it is and try to be as professional as I can in how I write. But deep down, I'm a Notre Dame fan. And so, we're sitting here doing this, talking Notre Dame football. I love it. I love doing this kind of stuff. And Vince and I are working on figuring out what our schedule can be to where we can start doing this stuff more often, because this is a lot of fun. Mark says, love all the work you do. Keep up the excellent work. Appreciate that very much. Stuff like that really helps us be encouraged to work the hours and do the work that we're doing. Do you see any scenario in the upcoming years where the QB calls the offense from the line? Best example is Peyton Manning. Not in college. You're going to see it some. I mean, you already see it some, but not in college. No, I don't think that's the case. Now, what we do see from quarterbacks already, Alabama's done this. I believe Oklahoma does this, is as part of your RPO package, you're going to give the quarterback certain freedoms to say, hey, this is the route that you check the RPO to. So, for example, you have a receiver backside, and you're running a gap, a buck sweep play where you're going to read the end and the linebacker and to pull and throw outside or handoff. Okay, so you look out and you see, okay, what's the window look like? So that means is there a linebacker or a safety between the tackle and the receiver off the ball? If not, that's considered an open window. That's step one. Step two is where's the corner? So you look at that window and you say, okay, the corner's off. It's an open window. I'm giving them a quick out or a hitch, right? Hit that. Or it's a situation where you're getting press covered, so you may give them a slant route. Or you may say, hey, we're seeing cover two. Let's bang a corner or bang a deep end or something. You can check that route to him based on what you've done in the pregame study as you break down the film. So you're going to say, hey, look, against this, we want to give them these two route options. Against this, we want to give them this route option. Against that, we want to tell them to do this. I think you need to have that. Or it can be just like a screen. You give them a check, some kind of signal that let them know what route he's going to run. It could be a screen, depending on how the defense is lined up. We're already seeing that. Steve Sarkisian allowed his quarterbacks to do that at Alabama. I believe Oklahoma has that freedom as well, although I'm not 100% sure on that. But I believe I've heard Lincoln Riley talk about that where he allows it. So I think we'll see things like that, Mark, where quarterbacks have certain freedoms within the RPO. And that's what I think is another good thing about the RPOs is because you're just telling one or two guys what to do. You're not checking from we had power called and we're going to check to our smash concept or you're just calling plays. We're calling the plays and then you got to make sure that you get us right with your checks. And I think the RPO allows it to be it's a lot easier for the quarterback to get right because it's just a check of a route. I'm going to get to these last couple. All right. Oscar Castaneda says, man, I really enjoy the show and your take on 3-star talent versus guys that have high ceilings. Appreciate that. I do have concerns on the receiving recruitment. Just seems nonchalant by the coaches. I think that's a very fair concern. I will say that over the last 2 to 3 weeks to a month, we're seeing them be more involved. And look, this is something we've talked about at this channel is I'm going to call them like I see them. When the coaches aren't getting the job done, I'm going to say it. The last month or so, led by Coach Reese, we're seeing the offense get more engaged. We're seeing Dell Alexander be more engaged. We're seeing Brian Kelly more involved, and those are positive signs. And look what's happening. TJ Williams was a guy that Notre Dame, people covering Notre Dame weren't talking about a month ago. Now he's visiting, and some people think they're going to get him. Christopher doesn't, but I understand it because Notre Dame doesn't have a lot of success at modern day. But now all of a sudden they're doing it. Well, why? Because they're picking it back up. They're getting more involved with them. And to me, so yeah, it's not nonchalant. It's not that. It's just it hasn't been the priority that it needed to be. In certain coaches, and I'm not talking about Coach Reese here, but certain coaches were not engaging with the fervor and the frequency in which they need to engage in recruiting. But I think that's starting to get corrected. Corey Dickerson, yes, you did miss the safety position this spring in progress. Oh, no, we didn't talk about the safeties in the spring. Corey, I thought you were talking about recruiting. We have a lot of recruiting questions. I think it's been a good spring for the safeties, mainly because I think Houston Griffith has really stepped up. And from everything I'm hearing, Houston is just – he's taken over. He's their best safety right now, keeping in mind Kyle Hamilton's not practicing. The other good thing is every time you see a big play made on defense, the first guy to run out, jump up and down is Kyle Hamilton. So clearly he's healthier, and he's going to be fine. But I think Houston's had a really good spring, a really big spring, and that is important. I think DJ Brown is solid, but we're also seeing his limitations. He's just not a guy that's going to be great in coverage, but he's smart. He can come downhill. And when Houston steps up, now you put DJ in that third role, and that worked better. And I think Justin Walters is having a good spring too, from what I'm told. Not just from what we're seeing on film, but, it's for a freshman. He's doing well too. Brandon asks, how is the nickel position different from boundary and field? What traits make a good nickel prospect, and who is Indy in the mix with that could play that position? So I think Jaden Mickey can play it. I think Jair Brown can play it. I think Devin Moore could play it. But basically, the nickel position is different from boundary and field. Couple reasons. Number one is you're tighter to the box. So there's going to be a greater run component. The run is going to be coming at you a lot quicker. You're going to have to be responsible for closing in and filling inside on runs more than a boundary or field boundary at times, but especially more than a field guy. Everything happens quicker the closer you are to the ball. So slant routes happen quicker. Quick game happens quicker because the quarterback can catch and just get it out right now, as opposed to an outside slant, which, takes a little bit more, let things clear inside of it before you hit that outside slant. An inside slant is catch, blitz, throw behind it. Those things happen quick. The slightest misstep from a slot guy and you're beat. There's a lot more need to be precise with your leverage. So if you're taking away the inside, the outside, those type of things can happen quickly. You got to be real precise. The other part of it too is the nickel tends to have more protection. And what I mean by that is you have inside linebackers protecting you. You have a safety closer. It's a lot easier for a free safety to protect the nickel getting beat up the seam than it is for him to protect the outside guy. Plus, if you're playing cover 3 and it's a vertical concept, you can be more aggressive rerouting, because not only do you have the safety playing in the middle of the field, but a lot of teams, when they play, especially like cover 3 with a single high safety, those corners are actually going to play their deep third from an inside angle to where they can then, kind of wind out and play the ball, but they can really squeeze inside and take the seam route. That's something that did not happen when Alohi Gilman against Clemson in 2018, when it looked like Alohi got beat. Well, Alohi was expecting the corner to squeeze inside and help protect that from the outside. It didn't happen. And so a slot guy will have a lot more help in that regards too. But just, you have to be a quick reaction guy and a physical guy, because things happen so quick, and because you're going to be taking on a lot more. You're going to get running backs leading on you, tight ends leading on you. Those things happen quickly. You're just not going to get that as much at those outside positions. All right. See here. Just going to skip a couple. Just have too much. We're going so long. I appreciate you all being here, but I'm just going to try to get a few more questions here. Notre Dame 2164. Does Chris Tyree have a higher ceiling than Kyron Williams? It depends on what you're looking for. If you're looking for a guy that carries the ball 20 times a game, no, I don't think he does. If you're looking for a guy that can be a game breaker, then yes, he does. And that's the thing we have to understand is Kyron Williams and Chris Tyree are not cookie cutters of each other. They're very different backs. And that's a good thing, because that means they can be used in a complementary fashion more impressively. And you look at things, say, well, which quarterback is better than who going in the 2021 NFL draft? Well, what offense are you running? I mean, those things have to be taken into consideration. Hey, this team needs a running back. So who do you want? Well, what type of running back do you need? Do you need a guy that can catch the ball? Do you need a guy that can carry the ball 20 times? Are you looking for a third down back and every down back? What system do you run? Are you going to be running in a lot of outside zones? Or are you a team that wants to hammer between the tackles? And the answers to those questions are going to determine which back better fits you. So that's a part of it too. But if you're looking for a back that can kind of do the dirty work, then Kyron Williams has a higher ceiling. If you're looking for a guy that's more of a modern running back in that he can catch it, he can run it, and he can do more damage with fewer touches, then that's going to be Chris Tyree, in my opinion, because he's a home run hitter. Kyron's a very good back, but Chris Tyree's more of a home run hitter. So it just depends on what you're looking for. My hope is that in 2021, the Notre Dame uses both of them to their strengths, and that's what gets me so excited about what this group can be. Brandon, you asked this, have you broken down any tape of 2023 prospect Ricky Collins? If so, thoughts? Notre Dame has been looking at him pretty hard from what I've read. Yes, we talked about this earlier in a question about, is Notre Dame only recruiting 2 corners? I have not watched film of Ricky Collins yet, so I haven't written about him yet. I've seen some highlights. I've seen some camp film, and I've talked to people who have seen him at camps. He's a good-sized kid, good athlete, slings it, and I like how he throws it. I just haven't seen game film to see how he's going through progressions, how he makes his reads and those kind of things. But from what I saw at camp, he's an interesting player and a guy that I'm going to certainly – I'm hoping in the next week or two I can get to a 2023 sort of early look at quarterbacks, but it's going to require me to get through film to see it. He's a guy that's near the top of my list, as is that kid from California. I think it's Nico something. I can't pronounce his last name. Let's see here. I'm trying to see if there's any more questions. I don't see. We have a lot more questions. If I didn't get to your question today, I'm sorry. There's about 10 or 12 questions I'm just not gonna get to. I appreciate that, but we got to wrap it up. We're getting to sort of the end of this, and I got some stuff I got to get to, and I know that this has gone on long. Maybe we're going to maybe early next week we'll do a Q&A because there's so many questions. And by the way, Drew Pine is not 5'10". He is absolutely 6 feet tall. I've been next to Drew Pine. He is taller than that. Tracy, thanks for being on it. Everybody, yeah, that's the last name of the kid from California who I cannot pronounce. Everybody, appreciate y'all so much for being with us. I mean, we're still here 2.5 hours in, still over 100 people. This is so awesome. Appreciate y'all being with us. I'm going to try to get in another one here soon. We're working on a schedule to see how it works to try to have, 5-6 live shows a week, mixing up the content. Sometimes we may talk draft before the draft. Sometimes we may talk team. Sometimes we may talk recruiting. Sometimes I'm going to definitely start that film thing at night where we'll just kind of watch through film and go through it. And just, I'll break down the film, and then at the end we can talk. We can have questions and things like that. So I appreciate y'all being a part of it. The people that gave us some super chats, super appreciate that big time. No pun intended. Really appreciate y'all support, not just with your time, with your finances. I mean, those are all amazing things, and we didn't ask you for it, and you still gave it. It's really, really appreciative. So everybody, thanks for joining us. Have an awesome weekend. My wife's out of town, so I get to probably not eat as well as I probably should. Get to hang out and watch some football up on the big TV upstairs since she's not going to be up there. But pray that she has safe travels. Y'all have a great weekend. The weather's getting nicer. If you're out on the road, be safe, have fun, talk Notre Dame football. Subscribe to the YouTube channel, hit the notification bell, subscribe to our podcast, wherever you get your podcast. And of course, as always, check out irishbreakdown.com. So for Vince, I'm Brian. We'll talk to y'all again very, very soon. And yes, like Notre Dame 2164 says, everyone hit the like button. Have a great weekend, everybody.